Hello everyone, welcome back to another scary story. Your place where we uncover the darkest mysteries in a calming and reflective way. For the next hour, I want you to put on your earphones, put your phone face down, and close your eyes. Relax, and let this story take you to a world full of chills and mystery. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. Now get comfortable and relax. I should have known better. When I moved into the Blackthorn apartments, I thought I was getting a deal. Rent was absurdly cheap, less than half of what I'd been paying at my last place. And as a broke grad student, that was the kind of thing I couldn't pass up. The listing mentioned historical charm, which I assumed meant old and rundown, but that didn't bother me. I didn't need luxury. I just needed somewhere to crash while I focused on my thesis. Plus, the apartment was huge. The building, though, was a different story. The Blackthorn apartments were a relic of a time when Gallows End had a pulse. Now, it was just a decaying shell, an industrial ghost town. The town had been built up around the old mill, but when the factory closed decades ago, everything around it followed suit. The streets were lined with crumbling buildings, and the smell of rust and mildew clung to the air. The Blackthorn was one of the oldest buildings in the area, a grim tower of brick and iron with creaky floors and chipped paint. The elevator barely worked, and the hallways were dim, the flickering lights casting long, ghostly shadows across the walls. But the rent was cheap, and I was desperate. The building had a history, or at least, that's what the other tenants said. They whispered about Silas Vane, the landlord before me. Vane's body had been found in the basement boiler room the year before, slumped over with a look of terror frozen on his face. No one knew exactly how he died, but there were rumors. Some said he was the victim of a robbery gone wrong. Others claimed the tenants had killed him. A few even insisted he'd died of natural causes, though the fact that he was found in a place that reeked of sweat, fear, and old pipes seemed to suggest otherwise. The tenants had their theories, too. They said Vane wasn't just cruel, he was a monster. That he ran the building with an iron fist, demanding rent on time, no excuses. They said he'd hold grudges, tormenting anyone who fell behind on payments. Some claimed he'd even locked tenants out of their apartments, or worse, locked them in. Of course, none of it was proven, but stories like that tend to stick. I didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that. I just wanted a cheap place to live and a little peace and quiet. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this building. It was quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like it was holding its breath. And as the days passed, I began to notice things. The way the pipes would rattle at night, the hum of a dying fluorescent light overhead, the occasional creak of the floorboards when I was sure no one was walking around. It wasn't much at first, just little things. I told myself it was the building settling, the usual noises of an old structure. But deep down I knew it wasn't just that. I'd made a mistake. I just didn't know how big of one yet. It was 3:17 a.m. the first time I saw it. I had been working on my thesis all night, the glow of my laptop screen casting long shadows in my tiny, sparsely furnished apartment. My eyelids felt heavy, my thoughts sluggish. I had planned on getting some sleep, but the words wouldn't come, and the pile of textbooks on my desk loomed over me like a silent reminder of how little progress I'd made. The building was quiet, almost unnervingly so. I could hear the soft hum of the fluorescent light above, the occasional groan of the walls. I was used to the noises by now. The building's creaks and sighs were the background soundtrack to my life. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was the silence, or maybe it was just the sleep deprivation. Either way, I needed a break, so I decided to make my way to the bathroom. I stretched as I stood up, feeling the ache of sitting too long, and shuffled out of my room. The hallway was pitch black, save for the faint red glow from the exit sign at the far end. The light flickered briefly, making the hallway feel even more eerie than it already did. As I stepped forward, my footsteps echoed through the emptiness of the building, too loud in the oppressive silence. Then I saw it. A figure, tall and unmoving, stood near the stairwell, just past the bathroom door. At first, I thought it was Mr. Kowalski, my elderly neighbor who sometimes wandered the halls at odd hours. He wasn't exactly in the best of health, and I'd gotten used to him appearing when I least expected it. But something about this figure was wrong. For one thing, it wasn't Mr. Kowalski. The figure didn't have the hunched posture, the cane that the old man always carried, or the shuffle of his feet. This shape was too tall, too thin, and far too still. It was like smoke, given form, its edges fraying in the dim light. It didn't move when I mumbled, "Mr. Kowalski?" I stared at it for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. Maybe I was still half asleep. Maybe it was some trick of the light, a shadow playing with my mind. But the longer I stared, the more I became certain that this wasn't a figment of my imagination. The figure didn't respond to my voice. It didn't twitch. It simply watched. My pulse quickened. The air grew heavy around me, thick with something unexplainable. I took a step forward, my feet moving before I even realized it. I thought maybe, just maybe, it was someone who had gotten lost, someone who didn't know the building. But then something caught my eye. The figure's outline had shifted just enough for me to notice it wasn't just the absence of light. It was the wrongness of the thing standing there. Its proportions were all off, too long, too thin, too unnatural. No person stood like that. I froze. And then, the worst part. It moved, a slow, deliberate lurch forward, too fast, too wrong, like something that had been waiting too long to act. I felt a chill seize my chest as the figure blurred into motion, its form distorting like paper caught in a flame. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest, a sharp, cold sensation spreading through my body. I slammed the bathroom door shut just in time. Thud. The sound of something heavy slamming against the door made me freeze in place. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I was too scared to even move. I pressed my back to the door, listening. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was slow at first, almost hesitant. Then the nails, or something like nails, began to scrape against the wood, dragging slowly, deliberately from top to bottom, as though whatever was on the other side was testing how much noise it could make before I cracked. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My chest was tight, my throat closed, and all I could do was hold my breath and pray the thing would leave. I don't know how long I stood there, my body frozen, my mind screaming at me to do something. The scraping stopped, and the building was silent again, save for the faint hum of the light above. I waited a few more minutes, my ear pressed against the door. I expected to hear more, something else, but all that came was the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Finally, I mustered the courage to open the door just a crack, peeking into the hallway. It was empty. I stepped out cautiously, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. There was nothing. No shadow, no figure. But the moment I walked into the bathroom, I saw it. The blackened handprints on the floor. Larger than any human hand, too wide, too long, the edges jagged as if burned into the tile. I froze again, my stomach turning in knots. They didn't look like the kind of marks that could be made by a real person. And the smell that lingered was heavy, almost metallic, like burnt wool and wet cement. I didn't need to be told what I'd seen. Silas Vane was still here. And he wasn't done. The next morning, I woke up groggy, my nerves still on edge from the events of the night before. My mind kept replaying the image of the shadow standing in the hallway, its presence seared into my memory. But when the sunlight filtered through the curtains, washing the room in a pale yellow light, everything seemed ordinary again. The apartment, the hallway, the bathroom, they all looked exactly the same as they had when I'd first moved in. Except, now I couldn't shake the feeling that the air was thicker, heavier, as though it were charged with some unspoken thing that I couldn't see but could feel deep in my chest. The black handprints still haunted me. I knew what I'd seen. I wasn't imagining it. But I also knew no one would believe me if I told them. I tried to shake off the dread, forcing myself to focus on my work. I had a thesis to finish after all. But every time I looked away from my computer screen, the shadow from the hallway would flash in the corner of my mind. The scraping sound would echo in my ears. The blackened handprint still sat in the bathroom, a ghostly reminder of whatever the hell had been in the hallway last night. I thought about telling someone, maybe even Mr. Kowalski, the elderly neighbor who lived next door. He had been around for years, and surely if anyone knew anything about the strange happenings in the building, it would be him. But every time I considered it, something stopped me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. It was as though I were standing at the edge of something deep, something unknown, and the only thing keeping me from falling was the tight grip of fear in my chest. When I finally forced myself to leave the apartment, I walked down the stairs slowly, making my way past the basement door where I'd first found the landlord's body. I had learned a bit about Silas Vane from the other tenants, the ones brave, enough to talk. They said he had been a cruel landlord, someone who lived in the building for years before his sudden death. No one had ever given me details on the exact circumstances of his death, but the rumors seemed to swirl around one thing: his obsession with the tenants. Some said it was because he was a miser. Others said it was because he had a habit of collecting debts in strange ways. But the one constant in every story was that Silas had been obsessed with getting his rent, no matter what. As I passed the basement door, I felt it again. That weight in the air, that oppressive presence. My stomach twisted, and I couldn't help but glance down toward the darkened, cold room below. There was a sickening sense of finality in that basement, as if the shadows there had swallowed something long ago and hadn't spit it out. I turned away, trying to shake the thought from my mind. I had to get out of the building for a while, clear my head. I went for a walk, but the thoughts of what I'd experienced at night kept bubbling up. I needed answers, but where could I even start? That afternoon, I ran into Mrs. Green, the tenant, who lived on the floor above me. She was a small, frail woman, always wrapped in a thick scarf, even in the warmer months. She smiled at me, a nervous smile, and I could tell by the way her eyes flickered toward the hallway that she wasn't entirely at ease in the building either. "I heard you've been having some trouble with the apartment, Eli," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. My stomach clenched. How did she know? I don't know what you mean," I stammered. "I mean, it's just an old building, right? Some creaks, some noises. Nothing serious." She hesitated, then lowered her voice further. "It's not just the noises, is it?" She looked around as though ensuring no one was within earshot. "The others have heard it too, you know. The thing in the hallway, they say it's Silas." I froze. "Silas Vane?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mrs. Green nodded, her eyes clouded with fear. "He never left. You might think he's gone, but he's not. He's still here. The rent's still due, you know." I didn't want to believe her. I didn't want to think that the thing I had seen in the hallway had anything to do with Silas. I had told myself that the strange happenings were just my imagination playing tricks on me, that I was just exhausted from stress. But hearing Mrs. Green talk about him as though he was still here, it rattled me more than I was willing to admit. "I don't know what happened to him," Mrs. Green continued, her voice trembling. "But they say he was buried, alive in the basement, walled up by the other tenants. They couldn't take his cruelty anymore." My stomach twisted. I remembered hearing the rumors about Silas's cruelty, but I hadn't thought they were true. "Why would they do that?" I asked, unable to hide the shock in my voice. She glanced at the basement door again, then whispered, "He was collecting debts in ways no one could understand. People said he was obsessed with getting his rent, even after he died. And some people say, and he still does." A chill ran down my spine as Mrs. Green shuffled past me, her hand clutching her scarf tightly around her neck. I stood in the hallway, staring at the basement door once more, my mind racing. Was it possible? Could Silas really still be here? Could he be the thing that had been watching me in the hallway? The thing that had left the blackened handprints on the floor? And if he was, what did he want from me? The more I thought about Mrs. Green's words, the more they unsettled me. I hadn't considered the idea that the strange happenings in Blackthorn Apartments were anything more than old building quirks. But now, with her warning about Silas Vane's lingering presence, I couldn't dismiss the thought any longer. I kept replaying her last words in my head. He's still here. The rent's still due. I couldn't understand it at first. Rent was due every month, and I was certainly paying mine. I even had a couple of months in advance for peace of mind. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized Silas hadn't been the landlord for decades. He was dead, buried in some forgotten part of the building's history, his body found in the basement, sealed off by some of the tenants. I hadn't considered this when I'd first moved in. I didn't know about Silas's obsession or how his death had led to the building becoming a strange and isolated place, haunted by the echoes of its past. But now, as I sat alone in my apartment, the weight of the air pressing down on me, the apartment's creaks and groans felt different. It wasn't just a place where things made noise from age. It was a place where something was waiting. I went back to the bathroom that evening, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I'd imagined the handprints. But there they were, black and stark, against the yellow tiles. The size of them, they weren't human. The prints were too large, the fingers too elongated. As I stared at them, my mind raced back to the shape I'd seen in the hallway. The shadow that had moved so unnaturally fast. The one I had thought was Mr. Kowalski before I realized it wasn't. It was too tall, too wrong. I leaned over the tub, examining the prints closely. The walls felt colder than usual, the air thick and stale. And there, among the black smudges on the tiles, was something I hadn't noticed before. A small, faint engraving at the edge of the floorboards. It was a name, Silas. A chill ran through me. My breath fogged up the mirror in front of me. Silas. His name etched in the place where the blackened handprints now marred the floor. A chilling reminder that this was his territory, his domain. Had to find out more. The next day, I went to the landlord's office to speak to Stan, the super. He was a gruff, middle-aged man who always seemed to be on the edge of annoyance whenever I asked him questions. But today I was determined to get more answers. "Stan, I need to know about Silas Vane," I said, standing awkwardly in the hallway just outside his small office. "The guy who lived here before? What happened to him?" Stan looked at me with that same tired expression, but this time his eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen before. I couldn't tell if it was fear or something else entirely. "You really want to know?" he asked, voice low. I nodded. Stan sighed and leaned back in his chair. Silas wasn't a nice guy. He was obsessed with collecting rent, even from people who couldn't pay. He had this reputation. It wasn't just the money. It was everything about how he controlled people. He had tenants on edge constantly. People started leaving because of him. Then, one day, someone did something about it. They locked him in the basement, left him to die down there. The building wasn't the same after that. The others say he's still here, collecting his dues. And I don't know if I believe it, but I don't know if I want to either. My mind raced as I processed his words. Silas had been locked in the basement, left to die. His obsession with rent, his cruelty, it had driven people to the point where they sealed him away. And now he was supposed to be haunting this building, collecting something from the tenants. What could it be? Was it the rent itself, or something more sinister? I had the nagging feeling that it was more than just money. It was something else. Something that tied him to this building in a way that couldn't be explained by logic or reason. Stan's voice broke through my thoughts. "You're not the first one to ask about him. The others, they feel it too. Some don't want to talk about it, but I see it in their faces. Everyone's got their own story. If you really want to know the truth, you're gonna have to go down to the basement, but don't say I didn't warn you." I froze. The basement. I had already been down there once when I discovered Silas's body, but I hadn't known what I was looking at back then. I hadn't known who I was standing over. I don't know what you'll find, but it's down there. The answers, you can't escape it. The building doesn't let you. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. The basement was always cold, but tonight it would be colder. "Thanks, Stan," I said quietly, not really knowing how to respond. I turned and walked away, the heaviness of what he'd said settling deep in my gut. That night, I couldn't ignore the pull any longer. Something was waiting for me. I knew I had to go down there to face whatever Silas had left behind. I couldn't keep pretending it was just an old building creaking at the seams. This place was alive in its own twisted way, and I had to find out what it wanted. I grabbed a flashlight, steeling myself for what lay ahead. The basement door loomed ahead of me, as dark and unwelcoming as it had ever been. I swallowed hard and opened it. The basement door groaned as it opened, the creak of rusted hinges reverberating in the otherwise still air. The faint flicker of the overhead light bulb buzzed, casting weak shadows that danced along the cracked concrete floor. I could feel the weight of the building pressing down on me, the oppressive quiet of Blackthorn Apartments settling in like dust. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the next move. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped into the basement, the flashlight beam cutting through the thick darkness. The air smelled musty, stale, like a forgotten memory. The walls, lined with old storage crates and broken furniture, seemed to close in around me. I wasn't just walking into a basement. I was walking into a place that had absorbed years of pain, fear, and violence. I'd already been down here, once when I'd first moved in, only I didn't know then what I was looking at. Now I understood more. I knew the truth about Silas Vane's death. I knew what had driven him to haunt this place. And I knew that I was about to face whatever remnants of him were left behind. I made my way toward the far corner of the room, where the air felt colder. The walls were darker here, stained with age and neglect. The concrete floor beneath me was slick with moisture, and every step seemed to echo louder than the last. I shone the flashlight around, my eyes searching for any sign of what I was meant to find. And then I saw it. There, in the corner, hidden behind a pile of old wooden beams and discarded furniture, was a faded door, one that I hadn't noticed before. It was smaller than the others, tucked away as if it were meant to be forgotten. The wood was warped and cracked, the hinges rusted beyond repair, but it was unmistakably there. It looked like a door that had been sealed shut, left to rot along with everything else in this forgotten basement. I approached it slowly, my breath shallow as I crouched down to examine the edges. I could see faint scratches, deep, jagged lines that had been made in a desperate attempt to break through. The air around it felt thick, heavy, like something had been trapped inside for far too long. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I couldn't stop myself. I placed my hands on the door, testing the handle. It was cold, colder than anything I'd felt in the rest of the basement. The metal was slick with condensation, as if the door had been waiting for me to open it. I hesitated, my mind racing, with 1,000 thoughts, but the weight of the building, of Silas Vane's presence, was too much. I had to know. With a slow, deliberate movement, I twisted the handle. The door creaked open, the sound grinding against the silence of the basement. I felt a rush of cold air hit my face, as though something had been released. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing what lay beyond. The space beyond the door was small, just enough room for a person to stand. But what struck me first was the smell. It was a thick, cloying scent. Rotting flesh mixed with something sweeter, like incense. I gagged, trying not to breathe it in, but the smell seemed to cling to me, filling my lungs. And there, in the middle of the small room, was a body. At first, I thought it was just an old mannequin or some piece of forgotten furniture. But then, I saw the face. It was twisted, frozen in a silent scream. The skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over a skull that had long since decomposed. The eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. It was Silas Vane, but it wasn't just his body that filled the room. The walls around him were covered in strange markings, symbols, scribbled in what looked like dried blood. The floor was stained dark, as if something had been dragged through it. It was as if Silas had been trying to communicate, trying to leave some kind of message from the beyond. And then I noticed something else. At his feet there was a stack of old envelopes. Yellowed paper, frayed edges, each one sealed with wax. I bent down to look closer, and my heart stopped. They were addressed to every tenant in Blackthorn Apartments. Each one bore a name, a rent, amount, and a date from decades ago. But there was one envelope that stood out, a single sealed envelope different from the others. It had my name on it. I felt a chill run through me as I reached for it, trembling. The paper was stiff in my hands like it had been preserved in time. I slowly broke the seal, my hands shaking. Inside there was a single piece of paper, scrawled in a hurried, jagged hand. "The rent's due, Eli. Always." The words blurred before, my eyes as if the ink was somehow alive, swirling on the page. I could hear the faintest sound like a whisper in my ear. "You're late." A cold breath hit my neck and I spun around, but there was nothing. No shadow, no figure. Just the oppressive stillness of the basement, suffocating me. And then I realized the truth. Silas Vane wasn't just a man who had died. He was something else, something tied to the building, to the very air I breathed. He hadn't just wanted money. He'd wanted control. He had wanted to collect from every tenant, forever. And he had succeeded. I could feel it now. The pull of his presence, the way the building seemed to lean in closer, as if it were watching me. Waiting. I didn't know what Silas had become, but I knew one thing for certain. I was his last tenant, and the rent was always due. I backed out of the room slowly, the envelope still in my hand. The basement door slammed shut behind me, sealing me in the dark. The building groaned, and I could hear the footsteps again, heavy, deliberate. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I wasn't alone anywhere in Blackthorn Apartments. Growing up in Black Hollow, Maine, a town shrouded in fog almost every morning, I had no shortage of peculiar moments. The weather was almost always a threat of rain or mist, and the silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional sound of footsteps on the wet gravel roads. It wasn't the kind of town where much happened. People kept to themselves, and any gossip or rumors seemed to slip away like the morning fog. But for me, the oddities started early, at the age of 4. I don't know what drew me to him, but I always knew he was there. I was never afraid. I guess when you're that young, fear is a foreign concept. It was just the two of us, often alone in my room. My parents, Claire and John, never questioned it, assuming I was simply indulging in a typical childhood fantasy. I was never the child who made imaginary friends, except for him. I called him the letter carrier. His figure was tall and shrouded in shadows, his silhouette blurry even when I tried to focus on it. His features were never entirely clear to me, and perhaps that's why I never grew frightened. I suppose as a child I simply accepted him as another part of my world, like the crickets that sang at night or the rain tapping against my window. He would sit on the floor at the foot of my bed, his long, spindly fingers resting on his knees, and listen as I told him my secrets. Secrets I never dared share with anyone else. Sometimes I would whisper about school, or about how I was afraid the kids would never like me. But mostly I talked about my dreams and my thoughts, things that seemed so big to me then but so insignificant now. The thing that confused my parents the most was how I would always refer to him as the letter carrier. They'd ask me what that meant, but I could never quite explain. I only knew that he was someone who brought things, someone who listened and understood. My mother would always chuckle and say it was cute, but my father never paid it much mind. They assumed I'd outgrow it, as all kids do. They never saw him, never understood why I spoke so fondly of him. But I always did. I remember the house. We lived in back then. It was a small old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, nestled just past the woods. The house had character, or at least that's what my mother used to say. It had a large front porch, a garden that hadn't seen much care, and a towering oak tree that scraped against the windows when the wind picked up. I hated the sound of it. There was something about the branches clawing at the glass that always unsettled me. The letter carrier didn't seem to mind it, though. As I grew older, my bond with him remained strong, and I began to rely on his presence more and more. He became a constant comfort in my life, even as my parents began to notice the change in me. I didn't make friends as easily as I had before. I spent more time in my room, and fewer people visited our home. Still, I never felt lonely. As long as I had the letter carrier, it felt like I had everything I needed. But then one day at the age of 10, he was gone. It wasn't gradual. There wasn't a slow fade, no lingering farewell. One night, he simply didn't show up. I waited, as I always did, lying in bed with my blanket pulled up to my chin, eyes fixed on the shadowy corner where he usually sat. But the corner remained empty. The silence felt different somehow, like something heavy was pressing down on me. I tried to call out to say his name, but nothing came. The letter carrier was gone. I didn't tell my parents, of course. I didn't want them to think I was crazy, or worse, that I was imagining things again. But a part of me felt abandoned. It was as if something I had always known and trusted had simply disappeared, and I was left to figure out how to navigate life without him. That was the last time I ever saw him, or so I thought. It had been nearly 2 decades since I had last set foot in Black Hollow. The town hadn't changed much, though I could feel the weight of time pressing down on it like the ever-present fog that clung to the air. The narrow streets were still lined with old, weathered houses, the same ones that had been there when I was a child. The town had always been quiet, but now it felt haunted in a different way. Maybe it was the passing years, or maybe it was the memories that resurfaced each time I crossed the town's faded welcome sign. I had returned to Black Hollow to visit my mother, Claire. She had moved to a smaller house a few years back, closer to the center of town. It wasn't much, one of those quaint cottages with flower boxes under the windows and a tiny front porch, but it had its charm. My mother's house felt like it, belonged to another life. It smelled like lavender and dust, a stark contrast to the old farmhouse I once knew. That day, as we sat in her dimly lit living room, the soft hum of the ceiling fan the only sound between us, I found myself sifting through an old box of photographs she had kept from when I was a child. They were yellowed at the edges, some of them slightly bent or torn. Each photo seemed to carry a weight of its own, a moment frozen in time that no longer felt real. "Look at this one," my mother said, pulling a Polaroid from the pile. She handed it to me with a frown. The image was blurry, and it took me a moment to make out the shape in the background. It was a figure, tall, shrouded in shadow, standing at the edge of the woods behind the old house. I couldn't see its face, just the dark outline of a person, too tall and too vague to be human in any meaningful way. My throat tightened as I stared at it. It was him, the letter carrier. There was no mistaking it. I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at the photo in silence, the strange memory of him flooding back. "What is it, honey?" Claire asked, leaning forward in her chair. "Is something wrong?" I blinked, trying to pull myself out of the fog that had suddenly settled over me. My heart raced, a familiar unease creeping up my spine. I don't know. I don't remember anyone being there when this was taken." She shook her head, laughing softly. "You always were the imaginative one, Lena. There was no one there that day. You were probably just playing outside and the camera did something funny. You know how old cameras are." I wanted to believe her, but something inside me resisted. The feeling in my chest, a cold knot that tightened every time I looked at that photo, told me that the image was no mistake. That figure, that shadow, it was him. I put the photo down gently, like I was afraid it would dissolve if I touched it too much. I tried to smile, to push away the discomfort. "Yeah, probably just a trick of the light," I muttered, even though I wasn't sure if I believed my own words. We continued going through the box, but my mind wasn't fully present. Each photo, each moment in time that I uncovered, only served to remind me of something I hadn't thought about in years. The house, the woods, the shadows. Later that night, as I lay in the guest room of my mother's house, The same old sensation crept over me. It was like a weight on my chest, pressing me deeper into the bed, making it harder to breathe. The walls of the room felt too close, the air too still. I pulled the covers up to my chin, trying to shake the feeling, but it lingered like a ghost in the room. I closed my eyes, hoping sleep would come, but instead, memories of the past began to swirl in my mind. I was 10 again. My bed was the same, the room still filled with that old scent of dust and pine. And there he was, the letter carrier, standing in the corner of my room, his shadow stretching out like an unnatural extension of his form. I could feel his presence, like a whisper in the dark. His eyes, hollow and empty, fixed on me, though I never saw them clearly. His hands were long and bony, resting at his sides. He didn't speak, but I could hear him, feel him, all the same. "You left the door open," he whispered, his voice soft but sharp like the rustle of dry leaves. I shook my head, trying to force the memory away. When I finally drifted off to sleep, it wasn't the peaceful escape I'd hoped for. The dreams that followed were worse than I remembered. The letter carrier sat at a table in an empty room, his long fingers curled around a teacup, his hollow gaze locked onto mine. No words were exchanged, but I could hear him, his voice crawling into my thoughts. The taste of bitterness filled my mouth. "You're not finished yet." I woke with a start, my heart pounding. Sweat clung to my skin, and I could feel the weight of the dream pressing against me. The air felt thick, suffocating. I had forgotten what it was like to dream of him, to feel his presence like a shadow looming over me. But I couldn't shake it, I couldn't escape it. The letter carrier was back, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what that meant. The night after my visit to my mother's house, the dreams didn't stop. They came like an inevitability, thick and suffocating, as though the air itself was weighted with something dark and long forgotten. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, something that wasn't supposed to be there. The house was still unfamiliar to me, despite the countless nights I had spent there as a child. The guest room, with its faded floral wallpaper and creaky floorboards, felt like a tomb. Every sound seemed amplified in the silence, the floorboards groaning under the slightest shift of my body. I couldn't get comfortable. The bed felt wrong, too soft, like it was swallowing me whole. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I rolled onto my side, pulling the covers tighter around me as if they could protect me from whatever haunted the edges of my thoughts. But I knew I wasn't safe. Not here. Not from him. The first dream came slowly, creeping up on me like a shadow stretching across the room. I was no longer in my mother's house, but back in my childhood bedroom. The same faded wallpaper, the same wooden floorboards creaking beneath me, though everything felt more alive this time, more real. I could hear the muffled sound of rain, tapping against the windows, the same cold, clammy air that always seemed to hang in Black Hollow. And then I saw him. The letter carrier. He was standing at the foot of my bed again, just as he had when I was younger. His presence filled the room, oppressive and cold, his shape indistinct in the dim light. He didn't move, didn't speak. His long fingers hung by his side, his head lowered, though I could feel his eyes, those empty, hollow eyes, burning into me. The silence was suffocating. I tried to scream, but my voice was trapped in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. All I could do was stare at him as his form blurred and reformed, flickering like a broken television screen. He was too tall, too thin, like a figure stretched beyond what was natural, and yet he felt so real, so close. Then he whispered, his voice a hollow rasp, like the wind rattling through the bare branches of a dead tree. "You left the door open." His words were sharp, like ice scraping against my skin, and I felt the chill settle deep in my bones. I knew he was talking about something else, something I couldn't fully understand, but that didn't matter. He was there. He was always there, and I couldn't escape him. I tried to turn away, to bury my face in the pillow and shut him out, but the pressure was too much. The air in the room grew thicker, heavier, and I could feel his presence pushing down on me, suffocating me. The bed seemed to shrink beneath me, the walls closing in. It was like I was trapped in the very essence of Black Hollow, trapped in the fog that never lifted. I woke up gasping for air, my heart hammering in my chest. Sweat clung to my skin and my hands were shaking uncontrollably. I blinked into the darkness of the room, the faint glow of the moon casting long shadows against the walls. The house was silent, as it always was at night, but it felt too silent, too still. My eyes darted to the corner of the room where I thought I had seen him. The shadows there felt wrong, different. I could almost hear his voice again, whispering from the depths of my mind. "You left the door open." I pushed myself up, my legs unsteady as I stumbled toward the door. My heart was still racing, and my mind was a jumbled mess of fragments, images of the letter carrier, the blurred figure in the photograph, the feeling of being watched. I forced myself to leave the room, telling myself that it was just a dream. That was all. Just a bad dream, nothing more. But when I walked down the hallway to the bathroom, I froze. There, in front of me, were the faintest, almost imperceptible marks on the floor. Muddy boot prints, the kind you only see when someone's been walking around in the rain, tracking the wet earth into the house. They led right up to my bedroom door. I stood there rooted to the spot, my breath caught in my throat. The air felt cold, the stillness of the house pressing in on me. My mind raced, struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. Had I left the door open? Had I been sleepwalking, maybe? But no. I didn't remember going outside. I hadn't heard anything. And yet the prints were there, clear as day, leading right up to my bedroom. The doubt crept in. I had left the door open, hadn't I? I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. But the image of those muddy boots lingered. A chill ran down my spine. The letter carrier. He had been here in my mother's house in my childhood home, and I couldn't deny it anymore. He had been real. I turned and rushed back to my room, locking the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to steady my breathing, but the dread wouldn't go away. It clung to me like a second skin, and the silence felt suffocating, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap. It came from the window. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know what was outside that glass, but I couldn't help myself. Slowly, I pulled the curtains back, just a little, enough to see through the rain-streaked window. And there he was, the letter carrier, standing in the yard. His gaunt figure was outlined in the pale light of the street lamp, his body almost too tall, too thin. His face was obscured by the wide-brimmed hat, but I could feel his eyes on me, even from this distance. His gloved hand, slowly lifted, pointing toward my front door. His lips stretched into an unnatural grin, one that was too wide, too jagged to be human. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. His smile widened, and then through the wind and the rain, I heard the whisper again. Special delivery. I pulled away from the window, my hands trembling as I backed into the room. My skin felt clammy, cold with fear. The house had never felt so empty, so silent. The air was thick with something unspoken, something that felt wrong in every way. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare at the door. I was no longer sure if this was a dream. I wasn't sure if I was safe anymore. I hadn't told anyone about the tap, tap, tap at the window. Not my mother. Not even my therapist, though I knew I should have. After all, how could I explain something so bizarre, something so out of the realm of normal? How could I articulate that the air in Black Hollow had thickened, become polluted, with something that wasn't supposed to be there? So I kept it to myself. I didn't want to seem crazy. I didn't want to be the person who said there was something haunting me, that I was being stalked by a figure from my childhood. But I was starting to lose my grip on reality. The muddy prints had been enough to unravel whatever semblance of normalcy I had left. For days, I sat in my mother's house, staring out the window, waiting for something, waiting for the next sign, the next symbol that the letter carrier was watching. Every time I left the house, I checked the yard. Every time I drove past the woods, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a shadow slip between the trees. But nothing happened. Not yet. I tried to push it all to the back of my mind. After all, I was an adult now, wasn't I? I had a life, a job, a future to worry about. But none of that seemed to matter. My thoughts kept returning to the figure in the rain, standing outside the window with that sickening smile stretched across his face. It was as if my childhood had followed me, clinging to my back like a shadow. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed something, a message, a sign that I had overlooked. The words "special delivery" echoed in my mind, over and over again. What did he want from me? Why had he come back after all these years? Was I the one who had invited him back? It was late one night when the first real delivery arrived. I had spent the day digging through old photographs, looking for something, anything, that might offer some clarity. I didn't find much. There were pictures of me as a little girl, with my mother, smiling at the camera, unaware of the shadows lurking just outside the frame. And then there was the Polaroid, the one my mother insisted was just an accident, a trick of the light. But the figure in the background of that photo, standing just at the edge of the woods, wasn't a trick of the light. That night I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was as if the photo was taunting me, daring me to look deeper. I kept picturing the blurry figure in the background, the one who seemed to watch us from afar. And then, there was the package. It wasn't big. Just a small rectangular parcel wrapped in yellowed newspaper. It had the same old-fashioned look to it, like something straight out of another time. The edges were crumpled, worn. The paper had a musty old scent to it, something like mothballs and dust, as though it had been sitting in a forgotten attic for years. I hadn't heard anyone knock, hadn't seen anyone come to the door. Yet there it was, sitting on the floor next to my bed. I didn't want to open it. But something deep inside of me compelled me to. I slowly peeled back the brittle newspaper, my fingers shaking as I lifted the edges. Inside, wrapped in faded, crinkled tissue paper, was a lock of hair. My hair. I recognized it instantly. The fine golden strands had been cut in the same way I wore my hair as a child, but it was too specific, too familiar. My stomach churned, a sickening realization dawning on me as I held it between trembling fingers. Who had kept this? Who had taken this from me all those years ago? And why? I dropped the lock of hair like it burned me, my heart racing in my chest. My mind scrambled for an explanation, for anything that could make sense of this madness. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And then, in the silence of the room, I heard it. A soft, cold breath. It whispered in my ear, barely audible, as though coming from inside my own head. "I've always kept your letters." The words sent a wave of cold through me, and I stumbled back from the parcel, my mind reeling. Letters? What letters? Who was this thing that was tormenting me? I had no answers. No idea what was happening, only a sense of growing dread that something was closing in on me piece by piece. I couldn't run away from this. I couldn't hide. I stood there for a long time, staring at the lock of hair, wondering if I was going mad, wondering if it was all just some twisted dream I couldn't wake up from. But the coldness in the room, the weight in the air, told me it wasn't a dream. This was real as the dirt beneath my feet, as real as the breath that fogged the glass on the window, and as much as I hated it, as much as I tried to deny it, the truth began to settle in. The letter carrier had returned, and he wasn't done with me yet. I couldn't escape the feeling that something was drawing nearer, something ancient and waiting. The house, the town, Black Hollow, it all felt like it was closing in on me, its fog creeping under the door, through the windows, and curling itself around my mind. Each passing day felt heavier, more oppressive. I had stopped sleeping. I had stopped eating much. My reflection in the mirror had become a stranger's face, pale, hollow-eyed, and worn down by the weight of the unseen. And still, the letter. Carrier waited. I spent my days in a daze walking the streets of Black Hollow, looking for answers in the mist-covered town that had once felt like home. But it was different now. The air was thick with unease, like the town itself was holding its breath. No one talked about the disappearances anymore. No one mentioned the strange, quiet deaths that had haunted the families living on the outskirts. Black Hollow had always had its shadows, its unspoken fears, but they were too familiar now, like an old friend you'd rather not greet. That night, a storm rolled in. I had been sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the faded photograph of myself as a child surrounded by family I hardly remembered, when the tapping started again. Tap, 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 soft, rhythmic, familiar. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. My hand gripped the edge of the table, knuckles turning white. I knew what it was. I didn't need to see him, didn't need to look outside to know who it was. I had been expecting this, in a way I couldn't explain, and I was terrified. The storm raged outside, the wind howling through the trees as I rose to my feet. Every step felt like a betrayal of my own body, a reluctant march toward the thing I feared most. I moved toward the window, my breath fogging, the glass as I hesitated, too afraid to look but knowing I had no choice. I pressed my palms flat against the cold, damp glass and looked out. There he was, standing in the yard, just as he had that first night. Tall, thin and cloaked in shadows. His postal uniform was tattered, his skin pale, drawn tight over his bones. His face was hidden beneath the brim of his wide, dark hat, but I could see his mouth, wide, stretched into a grin too monstrous to be real. His eyes, though, those hollow, empty eyes, they burned into me like fire. And then he lifted his gloved hand. Slowly, deliberately, he pointed at the front door. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I didn't want to go to the door. I didn't want to face him. But I knew deep in my gut, that if I didn't, he would come to me. He would find a way in. I walked slowly, the air growing colder with each step I took toward the front door. The house creaked around me, its old bones groaning, in protest, but I couldn't stop. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling as I gripped it. The moment I twisted it open, the wind howled through the door like a living thing, blowing the mist and rain into the room. And there, standing on the threshold, was the letter carrier. His grin had stretched wider, more monstrous than I had ever seen, and his eyes gleamed with an unnatural hunger. His voice came in a whisper, a sound that slid under my skin and curled inside my brain. "Special delivery," he said again. His voice, colder than the storm outside. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. It was as though my mind had stopped functioning, trapped in a nightmare of my own making. And then the package appeared. It was old, wrapped in brittle newspaper, just like the last one. But this time, there was no hesitation in me, no fear of what it might hold. I reached out for it, my fingers numb as I took the package from his outstretched hand. The letter carrier didn't move, didn't speak again. He just stood there watching me with those hollow eyes, his grin stretching wider still. I could feel his presence pressing in on me, suffocating me. And as I closed the door, I heard him speak one final time. "Your letters have always found their way to you," he whispered. I backed away, the package clutched in my hands. I couldn't think straight. The room felt too small, the air too thick. I tore at the paper, desperate to know what he had left me this time. Inside, there was a letter, no return address. Just my name written in familiar handwriting, my childhood handwriting. With shaking hands, I opened it. "Dear Lena," it began. "I'm sorry. I didn't want you to find out like this. I didn't want you to know the words on the page blurred as I read, my heart hammering in my chest, the truth starting to claw its way to the surface. I remembered, now I remembered, the day I turned 10, the day the letter carrier vanished. I had written a letter to him, a letter of goodbye. I had asked him to leave. I had asked him to go away. I had forgotten it, buried it in the recesses of my mind, because what followed, it was too much to bear. The letter carrier wasn't just some imaginary friend. He had been the manifestation of my grief, my fear, a thing I had summoned, in the loneliness of childhood, to fill the empty spaces in my heart, a thing that had taken root and grown, feeding on my emotions until it became something far darker, far more real, and now it had returned to claim me. The last line of the letter sent a shiver down my spine. I have always kept your letters, and now it's time for you to keep mine. A cold, hollow laughter echoed through my mind as I dropped the letter, my heart thundering in my chest. The room spun around me, and I knew now that there was no escaping. The letter carrier had never been a ghost. He had been me, and now I was him. The next morning they found the package, found me, still clutching the letter in my cold, lifeless hands. The neighbors would say I had gone mad. The sheriff would call it an accident, perhaps a breakdown, the stress of the town getting to me. But there would always be a lingering question, a whisper among the locals. What happened to Lena Voss, and why hadn't anyone ever seen the letter carrier leave? Semana Santa in Sancto Lugubre. The name itself felt like an omen. We had arrived just after dusk, the air heavy with the scent of incense and damp earth as the mist rolled down from the Pyrenees, cloaking the village in a thick, suffocating silence, the sort of silence that presses in on you, like the earth itself is holding its breath. Our family had been traveling for hours, our little white van weaving through the winding mountain roads, past patches of pine forest, and villages where time seemed to have stopped. My mother, Sophia, kept her gaze fixed on the road, her lips moving in silent prayer. Matteo, my older brother, had his headphones on, tapping away on his phone, probably trying to escape the reality of being stuck on this religious pilgrimage. And then there was Lucia, my younger sister, asleep in the back seat, her face framed by the light of the setting sun, looking like an angel who had no business being in such a dark place. I, too, was restless. Not because of the long drive, but because I had no desire to be here, in this forgotten corner of Spain, in a village where strangers whispered about things best left undisturbed. My mother had insisted we spend this Semana Santa reconnecting as a family, away from distractions. "It will be good for you, Daniela," she had said. "It will help us all find peace." Peace, I thought bitterly, staring out the window at the fog-wrapped hills. What peace could be found in a place like this? The guest house we'd rented was a decaying relic, a former convent or so the brochure claimed. But the locals in the village were more cautious with their words when we asked about its past. "It's an old place," the innkeeper had said with a tight smile not meeting our eyes. "Not many come back from there." That was all he had said. The rest was left to my imagination, which was already conjuring up images of crumbling stone walls, dark corridors and broken windows. The kind of place that felt abandoned, not by people, but by something much older, something darker. By the time we arrived at the house, the village had all but disappeared from view. It felt isolated, removed from the rest of the world. And as we made our way up the long, narrow path to the entrance, I could hear the faint creaking of the structure, like it was alive, groaning under the weight of time, of history. The wind, which had been calm on the road, seemed to intensify here, its cold fingers tugging at the sleeves of my coat. "I'll take the luggage inside," Matteo offered, already pulling his bag from the trunk and heading toward the heavy front door. My mother turned to me. "Are you sure you're all right, Mija?" she asked, as if she could sense my discomfort. She always did, even when I tried to hide it. But how could I explain that this place felt wrong? Not just the house, but the whole village. Its air was thick with something unspoken, as if the land itself carried a secret. "I'm fine, Mama," I said, not wanting to worry her, but my voice felt hollow in my own ears. "Just tired." She smiled, relieved, and took Lucia's hand as they followed, Mateo inside. I lingered behind, taking in the house one last time from the outside. The building was old, the stone weathered and worn, with ivy crawling up the walls like veins beneath skin. It stood crooked, as if leaning away from the earth. The windows were dark, empty eyes that seemed to follow me as I stepped over the threshold. The interior was just as I had expected, dimly lit, full of antique furniture covered in dust. The air inside was thick, carrying the scent of mildew and the stale remnants of something ancient. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and the walls whispered like they had something to say but would not. "Come in, Daniela," my mother called, her voice echoing through the empty hall. "Help us unpack." I nodded, stepping into the gloom of the house, the door closing softly behind me. As I crossed the threshold, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something I couldn't leave. The house, the village, it felt like it was waiting for me, like it had always been waiting. It didn't take long for the house to begin feeling wrong. After we finished unpacking, the house settled into a kind of eerie quiet, broken only by the occasional creak of floorboards or the distant flutter of something moving in the attic. My mother and Mateo were already in the kitchen preparing a simple dinner. Lucia was playing with a little doll she'd brought with her, sitting on the dusty rug in the corner of the room, humming softly to herself. It should have been peaceful, but there was something unsettling about the silence. The air was thick with it. I wandered through the house, my footsteps echoing in the hollow spaces. The hallway stretched out before me, long and narrow, lined, with doors leading to rooms I had no desire to enter. At the end of the hall was the old staircase, dark and winding, its banister thick with dust. I felt the familiar tension in my chest, a kind of suffocating claustrophobia that made my breath shallow. The bathroom door was ajar, and a sliver of light spilled out, casting a shadow that seemed to stretch across the floor. The bathroom was on the far side of the house, a little isolated from the main rooms. My gaze lingered on the crack in the door, and for a moment I thought I heard the faintest sound, a soft, wet, dragging noise. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. It was just the house, settling, I told myself. It was just the wind. But as I stepped closer, the sound grew more distinct, slow, deliberate, as if someone were dragging their feet along the floor. I stopped just outside the bathroom. The door was wide enough for me to see the dim, flickering light within, and then I saw her. At first, I thought it was my mother, standing in front of the mirror, the faint light illuminating her silhouette. But there was something wrong. The figure was still, unnaturally still, like a statue, the kind of stillness that makes your blood run cold. I stepped forward, calling out softly, "Mama." The figure didn't respond. Instead, it turned its head slowly, its movements jerky, unnatural. The face that looked back at me was pale, almost sickly, with too much light in the eyes, too much emptiness. And then it smiled. It was a smile I would never forget, wide and stretched, like the skin of the face was pulled too tight. The lips cracked, the smile expanding until it seemed to swallow the entire face. "Mama," I repeated, but the voice that came from the figure wasn't my mother's. It was gurgling, thick with water, the kind of voice you hear when someone speaks underwater. "You shouldn't be awake, mija," it whispered, its voice too soft, too slow. The figure began to move, its bare feet slapping softly on the floor as it inched closer to me. I froze, my heart racing, my breath catching in my throat. The smile never faltered, never wavered. It took a step toward me, and the floorboards beneath it groaned, squelching with an unnatural wetness, like something dripping, though there was no visible source of water. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. I blinked and it was gone, leaving nothing behind but the faint smell of damp earth and mildew. I stumbled backward, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the light. Switch. The bathroom was empty, my mother was nowhere to be seen. The light flickered one last time before dying out completely, plunging the room into darkness. "Daniela?" My mother's voice called from the other room, thick with sleep. I snapped out of my trance and rushed toward the sound of her voice, my pulse thundering in my ears. When I reached the kitchen, my mother was sitting at the table, reading her Bible, Lucia playing with her doll beside her. They both looked up at me surprised. "What's wrong, mija?" My mother asked softly, her face full of concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I thought I saw you in the bathroom," I said, trying to steady my breathing. "But it wasn't. It wasn't you." My mother blinked, then smiled, clearly not understanding. "I've been here all evening, Daniela. You must have been dreaming." I shook my head, but the image of that smiling face was burned into my mind. "No, Mama, I swear I saw you. You've been under a lot of stress," she said, her voice softening as she reached out to touch my hand. "The long drive, the change of scenery, it can play tricks on the mind." I nodded, but I didn't believe her. Something was wrong, something I couldn't explain. The house groaned again, and I thought I heard the faintest sound, a dragging noise like something wet sliding across the floor. The lights flickered once more, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was no longer certain of what I had seen, or what I hadn't seen. But one thing was clear. Whatever it wasn't done with me yet. The morning after the incident, I tried to convince myself it had been a product of my imagination, a vivid dream spurred by the stress of the trip, the unfamiliarity of the house, or perhaps the oppressive weight of the surrounding mountains. But deep down, I knew something had happened, something I couldn't explain. I woke early, before anyone else. The house was still, the kind of stillness that felt suffocating. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of moss and wet stone from the mountains outside. I pulled on my jacket, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me like a second skin, and went outside for a quick walk. The sun was barely up, the sky a pale gray, the world around me still shrouded in mist. As I stepped onto the dirt path that led away from the house, I could hear nothing but the distant call of birds and the soft crunch of my shoes on the gravel. The village of Sancto Lugubre, tucked into the heart of the Pyrenees, had a sense of isolation that felt almost oppressive. The narrow streets seemed to disappear into the fog, as if the village were hiding something. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I turned back toward the house. The guest house loomed behind me, dark and silent, like a quiet sentinel guarding some ancient secret. I sighed, pulling my jacket tighter around me. Maybe I was just being paranoid. By the time I returned to the house, the rest of the family was awake. Lucia was sitting at the kitchen table, her doll held tightly in her hands, her large eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. I forced a smile as I greeted her, but the way she stared made me feel like I was the one being studied, not the other way around. My mother was preparing breakfast, humming a quiet tune under her breath, while Mateo was reading the paper at the table. His eyes flicked up to meet mine when I entered, and he raised an eyebrow. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, his tone teasing but with an edge of concern. I shook my head, brushing off the thought. "I'm fine. Just didn't sleep well." Mateo gave me a knowing look but didn't press the issue. Instead, he pushed a mug of hot coffee toward me. I sat at the table, trying to act normal, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the night before. The figure in the bathroom, the gurgling voice, that terrible smile. I couldn't shake the image of the thing wearing my mother's face, standing there motionless as if waiting for me to notice it. At that moment, I felt it again. Something watching me, just out of the corner of my eye. I glanced up at the hallway, and there it was, the bathroom door still ajar, the faintest sliver of light spilling out into the darkened hallway. I swallowed hard. I told myself I was being paranoid again, that the house was simply playing tricks on me. But my heart pounded in my chest. Slowly, I got up from the table, excusing myself with a quick glance at my family. "I'll be right back," I mumbled, feeling the weight of their gaze follow me as I turned toward the bathroom. The closer I got to the door, the more my stomach twisted. I knew I shouldn't go in there, not after what happened last night, but something was pulling me toward it, a sense of urgency I couldn't ignore. I stopped just outside the door, my hand hovering over the knob. The air was thick, like the space between breaths. I could hear the faint sound of dripping water, slow, steady. The taps hadn't been turned on, and I knew for a fact that there was no leak in the pipes. It was a sound I couldn't place. Swallowing. My fear, I pushed the door open. The bathroom was just as I had left it the night before, empty, quiet. But as I stepped inside, something felt wrong. The light flickered once, then twice, casting long, jagged shadows across the cracked tiles. My eyes immediately went to the mirror. There, staring back at me, was my reflection. But it wasn't just me. It was someone else too, another figure standing just behind me, its presence so subtle I almost missed it. My heart skipped a beat as I realized the figure was not a reflection at all. It was the same pale, blank-eyed figure I had seen last night. This time the face wasn't an exact copy of my mother's. No, this thing was worse. Its skin was unnaturally smooth, almost too perfect. Its hair was wet, clinging to its scalp, in damp, dark tendrils. The smile was back, wide, stretched, as though the lips had been pulled too taut over the teeth, too thin to be real. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The figure's eyes were locked on mine, its expression blank, unreadable. I felt my legs weaken, my pulse pounding in my ears. And then, it moved. In the reflection, I saw it step closer, its body shifting and warping as if the mirror itself was distorting. The air around me grew heavy, like the weight of the water pressing, down from all sides. I took an involuntary step back, but the reflection, it didn't. The figure stepped out of the mirror. I stumbled backward, my breath ragged, my mind reeling in disbelief. The figure stood in front of me, its head tilted. To the side, its grin widening to an almost grotesque length. It opened its mouth, the lips stretching impossibly wide. "You shouldn't have come here, Daniela," it whispered, its voice wet, bubbling as though it were submerged in water. "You should have stayed away." The words sent a cold shiver down my spine, and I bolted for the door, my feet scrambling to move but feeling like they were glued to the floor. The figure watched me, unmoving, until I managed to break free, slamming the bathroom door behind me with a force that shook the walls. My heart pounded in my chest as I pressed my back to the door, trying to steady myself. But the sound of the dripping water persisted, louder now, as though it were coming from inside the walls. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I had to get out of this house. I had to get my family out of here. But no matter where I went, the feeling lingered, the oppressive weight of something ancient, something waiting in the shadows. The house was alive, and it was watching me. The morning after my encounter in the bathroom, I was no longer sure what was real. Everything felt like a half-dream, suspended in a fog that refused to lift. I tried to act normal. I forced a smile at breakfast, tried to join the family in conversation. But every time I glanced at my mother or Mateo or Lucia, I felt an odd disconnect, like they weren't quite themselves. It wasn't that their faces were different. They were the same. But the atmosphere around them felt off. Like static on a radio station that wasn't quite tuned in. They noticed my silence, of course. My mother gave me a concerned look, but I brushed it off, telling her I was just tired. Tired of the strange dreams, tired of the odd sounds in the house, and tired of feeling like I was losing my grip on what was real. The air in the house was thick with something I couldn't describe. It wasn't just the dampness of the mountain, fog, or the mildew that seemed to seep from the walls. There was something else, something heavy and oppressive, like a presence just out of sight, waiting. I tried to ignore it, but the more I tried to ignore it, the louder it became. That night I had another unsettling dream. In this one, I was standing in the same bathroom, only the bathroom felt larger, darker, as if it had swallowed the rest of the house. The tub was filled to the brim with water, black and still, and the walls shimmered like they were breathing. In the dream, I could hear the sound of water dripping again, the same rhythmic drip, drip, drip that had been haunting me since I first stepped foot in the house. Only this time the sound was coming from inside the walls. I turned to the mirror, but instead of my reflection, there was only a faint, blurry figure standing behind me. At first I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but as I stared, the figure became clearer. It was a woman, a nun, her pale face twisted in an expression of silent agony. She didn't speak, but I could hear her whispering, her voice soft but urgent like a prayer half forgotten. Before I could move, the door to the bathroom slammed shut behind me, and I was trapped. The air grew colder, and the dripping grew louder, closer. The walls started to pulse, the stone expanding and contracting as if the house were alive. The woman's face warped, her eyes rolling back in her head, and she reached toward me, her hand coming out of the mirror, her fingers gnarled and wet. I woke with a start, my heart racing, sweat slicking my skin. The room was dark, the only light coming from the dying embers in the hearth. I turned my head, half expecting to see the nun standing in the corner of the room, but there was nothing. Yet, as I lay there, trying to steady my breathing, I realized something. The whispering hadn't stopped. The faint murmur of voices echoed through the room just at the edge of hearing, like a crowd gathered in the hall outside. I got up quickly, my feet cold against the stone floor, and made my way down the narrow hallway to the source of the sound. The bathroom. The door creaked open, the darkness inside almost suffocating. The bathroom was exactly as I had left it earlier in the day, quiet, empty, and cold. But as I stepped inside, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The walls. They were moving, not in the way that walls should move, with the creaking of old wood or the settling of foundation. No, these walls were pulsing subtly as though they were breathing. The plaster cracked in places as if the very house was stretching, straining to contain something inside. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move, my mind racing. The sound of the dripping water was louder now, almost deafening. But there was no water running. The sink was dry. The tub was dry, and yet the noise continued. I moved toward the wall drawn by the sound. The closer I got, the more it felt like the wall was calling me, like it was speaking directly to me. I pressed my hand against the cold plaster, and for a moment I thought I felt something shift beneath my fingers, something warm, wet. I pulled my hand away, disgusted, and took a step back. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the far wall, partially hidden in shadow, there was a small crack in the plaster. A dark stain seeped from the crack, spreading slowly across the surface. It was water. I couldn't breathe. I stepped closer, my heart hammering in my chest. The stain was growing, spreading outward like an ink blot on a page, its edges darkening. The smell of stagnant water hit me in a sickening wave. That's when I saw it. Just as I was about to turn and run, something moving in the darkness beyond the crack. A figure slowly emerging, its hands reaching forward. I backed away, the sound of the dripping growing louder still. The figure was coming closer, and then the bathroom door slammed shut behind me with a force that rattled the entire house. I whirled around, my pulse racing, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The door was locked. From the inside. My mind spun. I was trapped. I could feel the walls closing in on me, the air thick with the smell of mildew and decay. The whispering had returned, louder now, echoing in my head, all around me. I began to scream, but my voice didn't reach the outside world. The bathroom door wouldn't budge. I pulled on the handle, desperate. But it was like the wood had fused with the frame, locked tight by an invisible force. Panic surged in my chest, a rush of adrenaline that made my hands tremble. My breath was shallow, frantic, and my pulse thudded in my ears. No, no. No, I slammed my shoulder into the door again and again, but it didn't give. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing denser with each passing second. My body screamed for escape, but I couldn't think straight. My mind was racing in every direction, trying to process the absurdity of it all. The whispered voices around me grew louder, more insistent. They were like echoes now, bouncing off the walls, crashing against my skull. I didn't know if they were coming from the walls or my head, but they were relentless. A low, gurgling sound that made my skin crawl. It's her. It's La Ahogada. The words came to me in fragments, words I couldn't ignore. I had heard the village elders speak of La Ahogada, the drowned nun whose body had been found beneath the floorboards of this very house, her lungs filled with holy water. But it wasn't just the nun I had to worry about. It was what she had become. My hand was still pressed against the crack in the wall, that stain of water spreading outward like ink on paper. The dampness beneath my fingers had been growing warmer, more tangible. My thoughts spun in a haze, but there was one thing I knew for certain. I wasn't alone anymore. The whispering reached a fever pitch, filling the space around me. The walls seemed to pulsate with each breath I took. The wet dragging sound from the hallway returned, growing louder, closer. Someone was coming toward me. I turned in a panic, scanning the room, my heart pounding in my throat. The mirror. It was in the reflection of the mirror that I saw it. She was there, the woman I had seen in my dream. She stood behind me, her face pale and ghostly, her expression frozen in that same expression of agony. Her eyes were wide and empty, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. But there was something more to her now, something shifting beneath the surface of her image, something moving. It wasn't her. The reflection twitched, jerking in unnatural ways. Her face contorted, the skin stretching like rubber, her lips curling back into an inhuman grin. And then it smiled, too wide for a human face. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. The reflection moved again, tilting its head, its eyes narrowing, locking onto mine. "Mia!" The voice came, but it wasn't my mother's. It was a slithering, gurgling thing, deep and wet. The words slithered from its mouth like a hiss, twisting and bending the air between us. "You shouldn't have woken up." My knees buckled beneath me. I didn't want to look back at the mirror, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The figure in the reflection began to move toward me, its hands reaching, grasping through the glass. The air grew colder still, my breath coming in visible clouds. The whispers became a cacophony, drowning everything else out. I could barely hear myself think over the screeching, wet noise that filled the room. The walls groaned. The floor creaked as if something was trying to claw its way out. The whole house felt alive, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. I reached for the door handle again, my fingers slipping in a cold sweat. It wouldn't open. The bathroom seemed to be shrinking, closing in on me, the weight of it pressing down, pushing me toward the mirror. I could feel the coldness coming from it, seeping into my skin, filling my veins with ice. And then, it happened. Hand shot out of the reflection. But this time, it wasn't just a reflection. The figure, the drowned woman, reached through the glass, her fingers grasping for me. I screamed, but the sound was muffled, drowned out by the overwhelming wet noise. That filled my ears. "Get out!" I screamed in my head. "Get out now!" In a sudden burst of clarity, I yanked at the door one last time, harder, desperate, and this time it gave way. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air, my body drenched in sweat and terror. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran through the house blindly, my feet pounding against the old wood floors. My breath was ragged, the cold of the mountain air stinging my lungs. The whispers followed me, always just behind, like the wet dragging of footsteps in the dark. I burst out into the cold night air, the fog rolling in thick waves, swallowing the house behind me. I kept running until my legs gave out, collapsing on the damp earth just outside the guest house, gasping for breath, my mind racing. I didn't stop running until I reached the village. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not the locals, not my family. I couldn't. No one would believe me. They'd call it the stress of traveling or the weight of our family's history. They'd say the house was old and the dampness played tricks on the mind. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. The house still stands, of course, and the church still looms in the distance, a dark silhouette against the moonless sky. But I'll never go back, not ever. The whispers still follow me even now. They call me. And somewhere, in the depths of that house, La Ahogada waits. Her reflection is still in the water. Growing up in Black Harbor, Maine, felt like living inside a ghost story that never quite let you wake up. The town was old, too old, and covered in a permanent mist that rolled in from the sea every morning and clung to the streets like a thick, oppressive blanket. As a kid, I never really thought about the fog much. It was just part of the landscape, like the weathered storefronts or the dilapidated boats in the harbor. But there was always something unsettling about it. It wasn't just the way it swallowed sound or how it made everything look like it was half forgotten. There was a feeling in the air, something that gnawed at the edges of your thoughts. I could feel it even then, like there was someone always watching. The worst part was the nights. It wasn't enough that the fog rolled in with the tide. It lingered cold and heavy, creeping into my room through the cracks in the old windows. My bed felt too small, and the walls of my bedroom were always too close. It wasn't until I was older that I realized the fog wasn't the worst part of the night. It was him. I never told anyone about him. Who would believe me? But he was, always there, standing at the foot of my bed, a tall, faceless figure in a black oilskin coat. His presence was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and stayed there. I'd wake in the middle of the night, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest, and there he was, like a shadow stretched too long, his features indistinguishable. I could never see his face, not clearly, but I knew, just knew, that he was staring at me, waiting. The first time he spoke to me, I was 8. His voice was sharp, like the sound of rusted metal scraping together. It scraped against my eardrums and lodged in my head. "You're mine, little shadow." I pulled the covers over my head and squeezed my eyes shut, hoping that if I just didn't look, he would go away. But I knew better. It didn't work. I could still hear his breathing, low and labored, like the sound of a man drowning. "Mom, Dad," I cried, but they never came. I could never explain it to them. My parents would just roll their eyes, thinking it was another nightmare. They had always told me the same thing. "It's just a bad dream, honey. Go back to sleep." But I never could. How do you explain that the nightmares aren't just in your head? That they're real? When I was 10, I told my mother about him, about the way he would stand at the edge of my bed, his form indistinct, his presence looming. She smiled, a soft, dismissive smile, and said, "It's just a bad dream, Lena. Don't worry about it." But her voice had a nervous edge to it, like maybe she was trying to convince herself as much as me. I remember her face then, tight, like she was holding something back. By the time I turned 12, I'd started seeing him outside my bedroom too. One evening, as I walked past the hallway mirror, I saw him reflected in it, just for a second, his dark shape looming behind me. And then the glass cracked. Not just a small crack either, but a long, jagged line that spread across the mirror. It felt like the crack was inside me too, like something had split open and I couldn't put it back together. I backed away from the mirror, my heart racing, but the hollow man didn't move. He just stayed there in my reflection, watching, waiting. That's when I realized he wasn't just a figment of my imagination. He was something older than that, something that had always been there, lurking, in the fog, in the shadows. He was waiting for me, and I didn't know why. At 15, the nightmares started to follow me even into the waking world. I'd wake up with the stench of salt and rot in my nose, his gloved fingers brushing my wrist, cold and clammy. I'd jerk awake, heart pounding, but the smell would linger in the air, heavy and cloying. And the worst part? His voice. It would echo in my ears when I was awake, when I was alone in the house. "I'll take you where the water is black." Thordien, Words would reverberate in my head long after the sound of his voice faded, twisting around inside me, making everything feel like it was drowning. The town of Black Harbor had always been close to the water, but that phrase, it meant something darker, something I couldn't understand. And as I grew older, the whispers started to feel more real. The Hollow Man wasn't just a figure in my nightmares, he was a presence, one that bled into my life, into the waking world. But even though I was terrified, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been marked somehow, that I was tied to him, tied to this town and its cursed fog. No one else seemed to see him, not like I did. And that scared me more than anything. I tried to push him to the back of my mind. I tried to tell myself it was just the overactive imagination of a kid who grew up in a spooky town. But deep down, I knew. The Hollow Man was real, and he was coming for me. By the time I turned 15, the Hollow Man had become a constant shadow in my life. He wasn't just confined to the edges of my nightmares anymore. He started bleeding into reality in ways that I couldn't explain. At first, it was just little things. A cold gust of wind when I was alone in my room, even though the window was shut tight. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, only to turn around and find nothing there. But it wasn't until the mirror incident that I fully realized how much the Hollow Man had attached himself to me. It started like any other afternoon. I was home alone as usual, with my parents out running errands. I was sitting in front of my vanity, mindlessly brushing my hair while the soft light of the afternoon filtered through the curtains. The house was quiet, too quiet, save for the occasional groan of the floorboards settling beneath my feet. But I was used to that. Our old house creaked and moaned like it was alive. But then something changed. I had just finished brushing through a knot in my hair when I glanced up at the mirror. For a second, I thought I saw something move behind me, a tall, black shape standing in the doorway. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. The figure in the mirror didn't move like a person. It was as though it was made of smoke, fluid and unnaturally still. For a split second, I thought it was my imagination, but as I stared, the figure shifted closer. I could feel it, this pressing weight in the air like a storm was about to break. The mirror reflected the shape, tall and unnervingly still, but the worst part was its face, or the lack of it. The Hollow Man had no face, not really. There was nothing where his features should have been, just an empty void. A darkness that sucked in the light and left behind nothing but the feeling of drowning. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. And then right before my eyes, the mirror cracked. It too wasn't just a small crack either. The glass splintered violently, jagged lines splitting across the surface, and the Hollow Man's reflection blurred, like his form couldn't quite hold together. I stared at it in shock, my mind trying to process what had just happened. There was no way that this was real. Mirrors didn't just crack for no reason. They didn't bend like that, like they were somehow alive. I reached out a trembling hand, my fingers brushing against the cool surface of the glass. The shards didn't cut me, but something did change. I could feel it, like a shift in the air, a heavy tension that settled over me. My pulse raced as I stepped back, my mind reeling. What had I just seen? I didn't have time to answer that question because right then, I heard something behind me. The air felt thicker, colder. I didn't need to look to know he was there. The Hollow Man was standing just behind me, his black coat sweeping across the floor, his presence suffocating. I could feel the coldness of his being, like a frigid gust of wind that made my teeth chatter. Without thinking, I bolted from my room. I didn't look back. I ran down the hall, my heart thudding so loudly in my chest I thought it would burst. I needed to get away. I needed to be anywhere but here, but no matter how fast I ran, the heavy weight of his presence was always right behind me, like an invisible hand clutching at my back. I didn't stop until I was outside, standing in the yard gasping for breath. I looked around, but everything was calm. The house was quiet again and the wind had stopped. The fog hung low just like it always did, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. That was the moment I realized. Whatever the hollow man was, whatever he had been, he was getting stronger. I wasn't just imagining things anymore. He was real. And the worst part? He had been waiting for me. I stood there in the yard for a long time, trying to steady my breathing, trying to shake off the terror gnawing at my insides. I wasn't sure how much time had passed, but when I finally returned inside, the house felt different. It was like the air had changed somehow, thick and suffocating. The cracked mirror was still in my room, but I couldn't bring myself to go back in there. I didn't want to see what had happened, didn't want to confront the truth that had settled into the walls like a poison. But I knew, deep down, that I couldn't run forever. The hollow man was still out there, still waiting, still watching. And he wasn't going to let me forget. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer safe. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, he was here. He was closer than he'd ever been before, and I didn't know how to escape. As I drifted off to sleep, the last thing I heard before I lost consciousness was the faintest whisper, like a breath in the dark. "You're mine, little shadow." And in that moment I understood. I was no longer just his next victim. I had become part of the story of Black Harbor and the hollow man who haunted it. And there was no way out. The weeks that followed the mirror incident felt like a slow descent into madness. I tried to convince myself it was all just some strange series of coincidences, my mind playing tricks, the stress of being a teenager, the isolation of growing up in a foggy town where the days and nights blurred together. But deep down I knew the truth. I couldn't outrun him. The hollow man wasn't a nightmare, wasn't something my mind had conjured in the dead of night. He was real, and he was tethered to me in ways I didn't yet understand. I had become hyper-aware of every movement in the house, every creak of the floor, every shift in the atmosphere. The hollow man had a way of changing the air around him, like walking into a room that was too cold, too still. And no matter where I went, no matter how far I tried to escape, I could feel his presence creeping in, like a weight pressing on my chest. I tried to talk to my parents about it. I needed someone to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. But when I mentioned the mirror cracking and the figure I'd seen standing in it, my mom dismissed it as a bad dream, a result of too much stress from school. Dad barely even acknowledged it, just muttering something about the fog messing with your head and suggesting I get some fresh air. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my parents didn't want to believe me. It was as though they were afraid of what would happen if they did. They were scared too, I could tell. One evening after school, I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. The fog was thick, like always, wrapping itself around the town in a way that made everything look distorted. Black Harbor had always been a town of quiet mysteries, the kind of place where people moved away and never came back, where things were forgotten, buried in the layers of time and tide. I wandered through the streets aimlessly, passing the old mill with its broken windows and rusting machinery, the once bustling harbor that had long since gone silent. There was a sense of abandonment here, something eerie about the way the town seemed frozen in time. And yet, it was home. I walked along the edge of the harbor, my footsteps muffled by the thick blanket of fog that clung to everything. The air smelled like salt water and decay, a reminder of how close we were to the ocean. It was in the water where the hollow man's presence was the most intense, and as I stood there looking out at the dark expanse of the bay, I couldn't help but feel his shadow stretching out over me. "You're mine, little shadow." The whisper came again, but this time it wasn't just in my head. It was as if the fog itself had carried the words to me. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just the empty docks and the faint ripple of water. Yet the feeling didn't go away. It was like the world had stopped, and everything, every breath, every movement, was watched by something I couldn't understand. I had to go home. I couldn't breathe out here in the open, surrounded by the vast, unfeeling ocean. It was like I was nothing more than an insect trapped in a jar. When I got back to the house, I went straight to my room, the only place where I felt somewhat safe despite knowing it wouldn't be long before he found me again. As I passed the hallway mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection. For just a second, I thought I saw something behind me, something tall, something dark, standing there in the hall. But when I turned around, there was nothing. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks again. But the air in the house was thick, oppressive. The quiet was deafening. Too quiet. It was then that I realized just how much I had changed. How much my fear had taken root in me. How much the Hollow Man had affected my every waking moment. I hadn't been the same since I was 12. Maybe I'd always been marked, always been bound to whatever he was. But what terrified me now wasn't just the fact that he existed. It was the realization that I was tied to him in some inexplicable way, that I might not be able to escape, no matter how far I ran. I sat down on my bed, my hands trembling. I looked out the window into the fog and waited. And that was when I saw him, standing just beyond the glass, his black coat billowing in the wind. But this time, he wasn't just a shadow in the corner of my room or a figure in the mirror. This time he was real. He was right there. And in the instant that I locked eyes with him, I knew I had crossed a line. He wasn't just some figment of my imagination. He wasn't just a creature of nightmare. The Hollow Man had been waiting for me all these years. And now I was his. A chill washed over me, seeping into my bones. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. His voice echoed in my ears, a drowning whisper in the back of my mind. "Happy birthday, Lena." The words sent a wave of terror through me, like cold hands had gripped my heart. I couldn't look away from him, and for the first time, I realized that I might not ever be able to. He had claimed me. The days following that moment felt like a haze, a slow unraveling of everything I thought I understood. I knew the Hollow Man had always been there, lurking in the corners of my life, but now it felt as if he had taken root in my very soul. I couldn't escape him, not in my thoughts, not in my dreams. He was always there, waiting, watching. Even when I wasn't aware of his presence, I could feel it. A constant gnawing pressure in the air, as if I was being pulled under, inch by inch. School became an unbearable drag. I couldn't focus in class, couldn't make sense of the noise, of normal life. The other kids noticed my distance, the way I looked at them like they were from another world. My best friend Sarah tried to reach out to me, but it felt like everything she said came from a distant, hollow place. I couldn't tell her. I couldn't explain. How could I even begin to explain that the thing I feared wasn't something we could just talk away, that my mind wasn't playing tricks on me? The Hollow Man wasn't a bad dream. He was real. I kept to myself, retreating into the silence of my room. My parents, particularly my mother, had become more distant, as if they too were afraid of acknowledging what had been happening. They never spoke of the incident during my birthday party, never mentioned the voice that had reverberated through the house. It was as if the world was pretending it never happened, and I hated it. I hated the silence, the way we all tiptoed around what I knew to be true. The thing that had haunted my childhood had returned, and I was utterly alone in dealing with it. It was late one night when I felt it again, the pull. The Hollow Man's presence was like a gravitational force, sucking the air from the room, making the walls feel too close. It was after midnight, the moon casting pale light through my bedroom window, the fog thick outside, smothering everything in sight. I had just closed my book when I heard it, a soft scrape like nails against glass. I sat frozen, my blood turning cold in my veins. My breath hitched in my throat. The noise came again, this time louder, closer. I stood up so fast my chair toppled over, but I didn't care. I was no longer afraid of waking my parents. They weren't going to save me. No one could. I crept out of my room, my heart hammering in my chest, the hairs on my neck prickling with dread. As I walked down the hall, the house seemed to press in on me from all sides. Every step echoed in the silence. Too loud, too piercing. When I reached the bathroom door, I stopped. The faint sound of water dripping reached my ears, and then a voice, low and muffled like someone speaking underwater. "Come closer, Lena." It was his voice. The hollow man's. The hairs on my arms stood at attention. I stepped forward, though. Every instinct screamed at me to run. As I reached for the doorknob, the door creaked open by itself as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, the bathroom was dark, save for the pale light filtering through the curtains. The mirror reflected nothing but the empty room. The sink dripped steadily, the sound like a countdown ticking in my ears. I slowly moved toward the tub, where I could hear a faint rustling sound. My eyes locked on the black water that filled the clawfoot tub, dark, almost ink-like, its surface shimmering under the weak light. There, floating in the water, were shoes. Black, glossy shoes, the kind you'd wear to a funeral. I froze. I couldn't breathe. The water started to ripple as though something was moving beneath it, something heavy. Then, in the reflection of the mirror, I saw him. The hollow man stood just behind me, his face a void, nothing but a swirling blackness. His coat hung in tatters, and in his gloved hands, he held something. My heart skipped a beat when I realized it was a pair of shoes. My shoes. I felt his presence behind me, cold, oppressive. His breath was like the deep sea, salty and suffocating. "Come with me, Lena," he whispered, his voice a crackling echo. "It's time to collect the rent." I spun around, but the bathroom was empty. The shoes were gone. The tub was still. The water a mirror of nothingness. I ran, my legs shaking with fear. I didn't stop until I was back in my room, locked away from whatever I had seen. My mind raced. He wasn't just a shadow. He wasn't just a thing from my nightmares. He was something older, something tied to this town, to my family, and now to me. I sank to the floor, my back against the door, gasping for breath. I couldn't escape him. The hollow man had come for me, and I knew deep down that he wouldn't stop until I was his, that this wasn't just a nightmare anymore. This was real, and I was running out of time. The days dragged on, each one more suffocating than the last. I couldn't tell anyone what I had seen. How could I? How could I explain that the hollow man, that faceless thing that had haunted me since childhood, was real, and that he had come to claim me? That the shoes in the tub, the water rippling with his presence, were not the product of my imagination. No one would believe me. No one could. I tried to bury it, tried to go on as if everything were normal. I went to school, sat through classes, nodded along to conversations that felt like they were happening on the other side of a glass wall. But inside, I was unraveling. The hollow man was everywhere now, his whispers in the corners of my room, the cold touch of his breath when I walked through the halls of my school. He was in every shadow, in every corner, watching me, waiting. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing in from all sides. The house felt wrong. Too quiet, too still. I kept hearing the faintest sound, like the scraping of something along the floor, and then like a weight sinking into the bed beside me. My heart pounded. I knew what was coming. The mirror on my wall, one I had never thought much of, caught my eye. I had never liked it. It was old, its edges chipped, the glass cloudy and warped, but it had never been more than a relic, a forgotten object in my room. Tonight, though, it seemed different. The reflection was distorted, blurry, like something was moving behind it. Stood up slowly, my feet cold against the wooden floor, and made my way toward the mirror. My breath fogged the glass as I drew closer. For a long moment I just stared at my own reflection, my wide, fearful eyes, my trembling hands. But then, in the glass I saw it, a shadow. The hollow man standing just behind me. His coat was drenched, hanging from his frame like the weight of the sea, his faceless head tilted slightly to one side, as if studying me. The mirror cracked. It wasn't a slow fracture either. It split down the middle with a sound like thunder, the glass shattering into jagged pieces that fell to the floor. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribcage, but the hollow man didn't disappear. His presence filled the room, thick and suffocating, like the smell of wet sand and decay. "You're almost mine," he whispered, his voice like the rush of waves against rocks. "No," I gasped, my chest tight with fear. "Please, not me. I don't want this." His hand reached out from the mirror, impossibly long, his fingers moving with unnatural grace like they were stretching across the boundaries of reality. I backed away, but there was no escape. I was cornered. He was everywhere. Suddenly, the room was cold, colder than I had ever felt it. The floor beneath me was damp, the air thick with the scent of brine and rot. The mirror's fragments began to move on their own, crawling across the floor like living things. My breath came in short, panicked gasps as I scrambled for the door, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed. The hollow man's fingers brushed my cheek and the world seemed to tilt sideways. My vision blurred as his cold touch slid down my arm. "I'll take you where the water is black," he said, his voice low and final. "Just like I did your great-grandmother." I felt the ground beneath me give way, as though the house itself was swallowing me whole. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The air was thick with the salt of the sea, and the sound of waves crashing against rocks filled my ears. I was no longer in my room. I was somewhere else, somewhere wet and dark. My skin was clammy, my body weighed down by the pressure of the water around me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see. But I felt it. The presence of the hollow man, hovering just out of sight, always just behind me, waiting for me to turn around. And then I remembered something. The family photo from before, the one I had seen with my great-grandmother. The one where the hollow man stood just behind her, barely visible in the background. My great-grandmother who had disappeared without a trace on her 17th birthday. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This was it. The cycle. The hollow man had claimed every child before me, and now it was my turn. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the water, feeling my lungs burn as I fought to hold on. But it was no use. The hollow man had been waiting for this moment for decades. He was the shadow in our family, the curse that had followed us for generations, and now I was his. The water pulled me deeper, the darkness swallowing me whole. There was no escaping it. I felt my body go limp as the waves took me, as the hollow man's voice whispered one last time in my ear, his breath cold against my skin. "Welcome home, Lena." And then, there was nothing. The trailer had been here longer than I could remember. When we moved in, I was 8. Finn was 3, and our mom had just gotten out of another bad relationship. She said this place would be temporary, just until she found something better. But that was before she started working nights at the truck stop off Route 9. That was before she met Joe, who we never saw again after a few months. That was before things got stuck in a routine that felt like it was going to suffocate us. The trailer was an old, rusty single-wide, a faded beige color that was starting to chip away at the corners. The kind of place that didn't look like it had ever had a good day in its life. The floor sagged, especially in the living room and the hallway near the bathroom, and sometimes the walls groaned like they were tired. The windows were cracked in places, and if you looked real close, you could see that the seals around them had gone bad, leaving streaks of mold and condensation between the panes. The roof leaked in the winter, so our mom would put buckets around the place when it rained. Finn never seemed to mind. He loved the trailer, mostly because it was his safe spot. He'd drag his blanket around, wrap it around himself like a cape, and pretend he was some kind of superhero. He didn't understand yet that the trailer was more than just a house. It was a place full of whispers, things that you couldn't quite hear, but always felt close by, waiting. Sometimes I'd hear him talking to himself, giggling in his room, and I'd knock on the door to see if he was okay. He always smiled and said it was just his friends, but I didn't believe him. I'd lay in bed at night staring at the shadows, feeling like they were moving, breathing. I don't know how to explain it, but the trailer was too quiet. The silence wasn't the kind you could settle into. It felt wrong. It pressed against you, made you feel like you couldn't get enough air, like something was always watching. There were nights I'd wake up to the sound of scratching. But when I'd sit up and turn on the light, there was nothing. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps, light but deliberate, coming from the kitchen, but I'd go and check and everything was still. Finn used to say that he heard whispering under his bed. I told him it was just the wind or the pipes acting up. It wasn't true, but I didn't want to admit it. Not to him. I remember the way the trailer always smelled. It wasn't just mildew. It was something more, like something old, something forgotten that never quite let go. If I had to guess, it was probably a mix of the damp wood and the rusted pipes, but every time I took a deep breath in, I swore it smelled like something worse, like meat that had been left out in the sun for too long. I couldn't shake the feeling that the trailer was holding something bad. The worst part was the shadows. At night, they'd gather in the corners of the room, thick and dark, like they were growing, like they had weight to them. I'd stare at the walls and wait for the shapes to shift, wondering what would happen if I looked too long. Finn would be asleep in his bed across the room, but I'd still feel like something was watching me, always watching. It didn't help that the trees outside the trailer pressed in so close, their branches reaching across the windows like they were trying to get in. The wind would blow and the branches would scratch against the metal siding, making this eerie scraping noise that always made my heart beat faster. I'd close the blinds, but the shadows were always there. It was like they knew when you were afraid, and that was when they came closer. Finn used to tell me about the whispers, how they came from under his bed at night. I didn't believe him at first, but there were nights when I'd sit in the dark, staring at the cracks in the wall, and I'd hear it too. Faint, soft, like something trying to talk to you from a distance. I told myself it was the house settling, the wind moving through the pipes, but deep down I knew it wasn't. It wasn't the house, and it wasn't the wind. That's when I started to hear things at night. It wasn't just the scratching or the whispering. It was something worse. Something that didn't belong. The air would get thick, heavy, and that's when I'd feel it, creeping up behind me, like it was waiting, watching. I used to think maybe I was just imagining things. That's what you tell yourself when you're scared and there's no one around to tell you it's okay. But one thing I knew for sure, the trailer wasn't just a place to live. It was a place where something lived too, and it didn't like to be ignored. It was around 2:37 a.m. when I woke up with a start, the kind of sudden jolt that makes your heart race before you even understand what's happening. My skin was cold, the room freezing like the heater had shut off hours ago. The trailer's thin. Walls couldn't keep the cold out in the winter, but this felt different. I didn't know why, but I knew something was wrong. I sat up, my head pounding from a weird kind of pressure, like the air itself had thickened. I rubbed my eyes, tried to shake off the fog of sleep, but it wouldn't go away. That's when I noticed it, the silence. I'd always been used to the sounds of the trailer at night, the creaks of the walls, the subtle groans of the floorboards, the soft rattle of the window frames when the wind picked up. But now, nothing. It was too quiet. The kind of quiet that felt too deep, like it was swallowing everything around you. I shifted, swinging my legs off the bed, my bare feet touching the cold floor. I could barely make out the shape of Finn's bed across the room in the dark. The glow from the old clock on my nightstand cast a faint blue light, but it didn't feel like enough. The shadows were different tonight, stretching farther across the room like they were waiting. I stood up and walked toward the door, my breath fogging up the air as I went. The trailer creaked again, but this time it was different, like the wood was shifting under pressure. That was when I saw it. A shape, blacker than black, moving along the far wall of the living room. At first, I thought it was just my eyes, adjusting to the dark, but no. This thing wasn't a shadow, it wasn't a trick of the light, it had no clear shape, just this hunched silhouette that was impossibly tall, taller than any person should be, and it wasn't making a sound. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribcage as I watched it. It wasn't moving like a person would. It slid along the wall, unnatural, as if it didn't have the weight of a body at all, like it was too light or too heavy all at once. The thing tilted its head slowly, as though listening to the beat of my heart. I didn't know how I knew, but I did. It was listening to me. And then just as slowly, it stepped closer. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. My legs were paralyzed, like my body forgot how to work. My throat went dry. My mouth felt like it was full of cotton. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't do anything. I just watched it, my eyes wide and locked on the dark shape that was getting closer and closer. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a figment of my imagination. Maybe I was just dreaming, sleepwalking or something. But I knew, deep down I knew, that it was real. Whatever it was real. And it was here. Then it took another step forward, its body lurching into the light. And I saw something I'll never forget. The shape didn't cast a shadow. It was like the light was bending around it, swallowing it whole. It didn't belong to the world. My mind tried to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. I tried to run, tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. It was like I was glued to the spot. The thing moved even closer, its form growing more, defined, but I still couldn't see a face. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just an endless expanse of darkness, as if the thing itself was the night. I forced myself to turn my head, to move, and in that instant, I slammed my back into the edge of the bed. The impact broke the spell. I fell to the floor, my body hitting the cold surface with a sharp thud. That was when the thing disappeared. Just like that. One moment it was there, its presence thick and suffocating, and the next, it was gone. The room was silent again. Too silent. My chest heaved with short, shallow breaths as I crawled back into my bed. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare into the empty room, every muscle in my body trembling with the aftermath of the terror I'd just felt. I had no idea what I'd seen, but I knew it wasn't a dream. It was real. The thing was real. But when I tried to look over at Finn's bed, my stomach dropped. He was sitting up, his face pale and wide-eyed, staring straight at me. He was awake, his body still intense. For a moment, I thought he might have heard something too, but then he whispered something that made the blood drain from my face. "It's here, Jace. It's waiting under my bed." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell him it was just the dark playing tricks on him, but I couldn't, because I knew. I knew the thing he was talking about was real, and it was still here. The days after the first night were a blur. I went through the motions of life, waking up, eating cereal, trying to keep my head down, but every corner of the trailer felt haunted. Even in daylight, the shadows seemed too thick, too close. The air felt heavier, like it was filled with something I couldn't name, but it made my skin crawl. Finn hadn't said anything more about the thing under his bed, but I could see it in the way he looked at every dark corner. The way he wouldn't go near the bathroom without me. I couldn't bring myself to tell Mom. She'd probably just brush it off as us imagining things, or worse, as something wrong with us. And maybe, deep down, I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear her dismiss everything I had seen, because I knew what I had seen and I knew it wasn't some bad dream or trick of the light. The thing was real. It came every night. At first it started slow, just a noise here or there, a creak in the floor, the sound of something dragging across the ceiling. I told myself it was just the trailer settling, just the wind getting under, the cracks in the walls. But then the noises got louder, more distinct. I couldn't ignore them anymore. Something was moving around at night. Something wasn't right. Finn was the first to notice the bruises. They appeared overnight, on his ankles, like someone had grabbed him in the dark and squeezed until the blood pooled under his skin. I was still trying to come up with a reasonable explanation when it happened again. The TV clicked on by itself in the middle of the night, the static buzzing loudly in the otherwise silent trailer. But this time, it wasn't just static. There was movement in the screen. I could barely make out the shape, but I knew. It was the same hulking, shadowed figure I'd seen before. It was there, flickering in the static, moving in and out of focus, but still unmistakable. I reached for the remote to turn it off. but it wouldn't budge. The TV kept showing that same black silhouette, its form shifting and stretching in the static like it was trying to claw its way out of the screen. I turned to Finn. He was frozen in the corner of the room, his face pale and wide-eyed. "Finn?" I called, but his eyes didn't move. His gaze was locked on the screen. He was staring at the figure like it was calling to him. I yanked the cord out of the wall and the screen went blank. Silence fell again. But the silence felt wrong. Something was in the air. Something was watching us. The next few nights, I could feel it getting closer. I'd wake up to the weight of something pressing down on my chest, as though the air itself had become too thick, too heavy. My heart would race, and I'd look around, half expecting to see it there in the corner again. But the thing never fully revealed itself. It was always just outside my field of vision, just enough to feel it, but not enough to see it clearly. Then came the claw marks. I was at the kitchen table one evening, trying to do my homework, when I noticed something out of place. The front door was scratched, deep gouges in the wood like something had tried to rip its way inside. The scratches weren't from the wind. They weren't from any animal. They were from something with long claws. The marks were too precise, too jagged. I stood frozen in the doorway for a few minutes, my heart hammering in my chest. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the door had been scratched by a branch or something else outside. But as soon as I reached out to touch the door, my fingers brushed against something cold. It wasn't just the air. It was like the door had been touched by something, like it had been scratched by something with intent. That night, I woke up to something worse. I don't know what woke me, but I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding. I wasn't sure what it was, but I could feel it. A presence looming over me. The room felt too small, like the walls were closing in. And then, I felt it. The weight. The heavy pressure on my chest, like something was pinning me down. My breath came out in quick, shallow gasps as I struggled to move. I could barely see the room spinning around me, but I knew it was there. Right there. The air smelled like wet earth and rot, like the thing was standing directly above me, its cold presence seeping into my skin. I tried to scream. I tried to shout for Finn, but my throat was dry, my voice gone. All I could do was lay there, paralyzed, as the thing hovered over me. I didn't know if it had a face or what it wanted, but the whispers filled my ears. They were muffled at first, but then they grew louder. And then, just as I thought I might suffocate under the weight of it all, it spoke. The voice was hollow, like a corpse dragged over gravel. "You're mine now." I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. I felt my body go cold, and for a split second I thought I was going to die right there in that bed. The words echoed in my head, each syllable hanging in the air long after it was spoken. But then, just as quickly as it had come, it was gone. I bolted upright, gasping for air. I couldn't catch my breath. The room was empty, silent, except for one thing: Finn's bed was empty. I spun around, my heart thudding in my chest. Finn had been there when I fell asleep. He had to be. But now, his bed was bare. I rushed to the living room, my heart pounding harder with every step. That's when I found him. Finn was sitting in the dark, curled up on the couch, his back to me. "Finn," I whispered. He didn't answer. I stepped closer, reaching for him, when I saw it, the thing I would never forget. Finn's eyes, solid, black, no whites, no pupils, just empty voids of shadow, and he was smiling. My stomach turned, nausea rising like bile in my throat. This wasn't my little brother anymore. The thing had him. The darkness in the trailer felt suffocating now. It wasn't just the empty spaces or the creaking of the walls as they settled under the weight of time. It was the air itself. Thick, drenched with something foul and heavy. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like the walls were closing in, on me. Like the shadows weren't just passive observers, but were alive, crawling, watching. I stood there, frozen, staring at Finn, my little brother, sitting on the couch, his back to me. His shoulders were slumped, as if weighed down by something far heavier than his small frame. His breathing was shallow, almost too shallow. It was the kind of breath you'd hear from someone trying to stifle a sob. But there was nothing else. No sounds of distress, no crying, nothing, and those eyes black, solid, hollow. It was like staring into a void, a deep, endless well. And there was something else there too, something wrong with his smile. It was stretched too wide, unnaturally so, and it didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they know something you don't, when they hold a terrible secret that they're savoring, letting it burn in their chest as they watch you suffer. I took a step forward, hesitant. I wasn't sure what to say or what to do. The thing in my brother's body was still wearing him like a costume, a skinwalker, or worse. I didn't know how to stop it, didn't know if there was even a way to fix it, but I had to try. Finn? My voice cracked as I called his name, again. My heart was pounding, echoing in my ears. He didn't respond, but his head tilted just slightly like he could hear me now. The smile on his face only grew wider, stretching unnaturally. I took another step forward, the air growing colder, the hairs on my neck standing on end. That's when I felt it, the weight. It wasn't just the presence of the thing wearing my brother's body. It was something else. A pressure, pushing, against me, closing in from all sides. It was like the whole trailer was squeezing me, pushing me into the walls. Then, suddenly, I heard it. The whispers. At first I thought it was the wind or the hum of the trailer settling, but no. The whispers were inside me now, slithering in my head, words I couldn't make out, murmurs like a crowd of voices just beyond my hearing. And then, one voice rose above the rest. "You can't save him." I froze. It was the same voice, the voice I'd heard in the darkness, in my dreams, in the thing's breath. It was the thing itself speaking from somewhere deep inside my brother. I reached out for Finn, my hand shaking. I had to try. I had to do something. He was my brother. I touched his shoulder. The second my skin made contact, the smile vanished. It was replaced with something far worse. A wide, gaping hole of darkness that seemed to stretch into infinity. I recoiled, stumbling back. Finn's head jerked to the side, his neck snapping unnaturally, a sickening crack that made me gag. "You're mine now," the voice whispered again. But it wasn't Finn's voice, it wasn't even the thing's voice anymore. It was my voice, a distorted version of me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. It was like the trailer had become a trap, a cage I couldn't escape from. The walls seemed to close in tighter, the air heavier, the darkness thicker. The floor beneath me seemed to warp, to melt. And that's when I realized the truth. The thing was never after just Finn. It was after both of us. This place, Black Pines Trailer Park, wasn't just built on land. It was built on something. Something ancient, something dark. A curse. The whispers I had heard as a kid. Those had been the warning signs, the signs that I'd ignored. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. The voice was hollow, like a corpse dragged over gravel. "You're mine now." I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. I felt my body go cold, and for a split second I thought I was going to die right there in that bed. The words echoed in my head, each syllable hanging in the air long after it was spoken. But then, just as quickly as it had come, it was gone. I bolted upright, gasping for air. I couldn't catch my breath. The room was empty, silent, except for one thing: Finn's bed was empty. I spun around, my heart thudding in my chest. Finn had been there when I fell asleep. He had to be. But now, his bed was bare. I rushed to the living room, my heart pounding harder with every step. That's when I found him. Finn was sitting in the dark, curled up on the couch, his back to me. "Finn," I whispered. He didn't answer. I stepped closer, reaching for him, when I saw it, the thing I would never forget. Finn's eyes. Solid, black, no whites, no pupils, just empty voids of shadow, and he was smiling. My stomach turned, nausea rising like bile in my throat. This wasn't my little brother anymore. The thing had him. The darkness in the trailer felt suffocating now. It wasn't just the empty spaces or the creaking of the walls as they settled under the weight of time. It was the air itself. Thick, drenched with something foul and heavy. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like the walls were closing in, on me. Like the shadows weren't just passive observers, but were alive, crawling, watching. I stood there, frozen, staring at Finn, my little brother, sitting on the couch, his back to me. His shoulders were slumped, as if weighed down by something far heavier than his small frame. His breathing was shallow, almost too shallow. It was the kind of breath you'd hear from someone trying to stifle a sob. But there was nothing else. No sounds of distress, no crying, nothing, and those eyes black, solid, hollow. It was like staring into a void, a deep, endless well. And there was something else there too, something wrong with his smile. It was stretched too wide, unnaturally so, and it didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they know something you don't, when they hold a terrible secret that they're savoring, letting it burn in their chest as they watch you suffer. I took a step forward, hesitant. I wasn't sure what to say or what to do. The thing in my brother's body was still wearing him like a costume, a skinwalker, or worse. I didn't know how to stop it, didn't know if there was even a way to fix it, but I had to try. Finn? My voice cracked as I called his name, again. My heart was pounding, echoing in my ears. He didn't respond, but his head tilted just slightly like he could hear me now. The smile on his face only grew wider, stretching unnaturally. I took another step forward, the air growing colder, the hairs on my neck standing on end. That's when I felt it, the weight. It wasn't just the presence of the thing wearing my brother's body. It was something else. A pressure, pushing, against me, closing in from all sides. It was like the whole trailer was squeezing me, pushing me into the walls. Then, suddenly, I heard it. The whispers. At first I thought it was the wind or the hum of the trailer settling, but no. The whispers were inside me now, slithering in my head, words I couldn't make out, murmurs like a crowd of voices just beyond my hearing. And then, one voice rose above the rest. "You can't save him." I froze. It was the same voice, the voice I'd heard in the darkness, in my dreams, in the thing's breath. It was the thing itself speaking from somewhere deep inside my brother. I reached out for Finn, my hand shaking. I had to try. I had to do something. He was my brother. I touched his shoulder. The second my skin made contact, the smile vanished. It was replaced with something far worse. A wide, gaping hole of darkness that seemed to stretch into infinity. I recoiled, stumbling back. Finn's head jerked to the side, his neck snapping unnaturally, a sickening crack that made me gag. "You're mine now," the voice whispered again. But it wasn't Finn's voice, it wasn't even the thing's voice anymore. It was my voice, a distorted version of me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. It was like the trailer had become a trap, a cage I couldn't escape from. The walls seemed to close in tighter, the air heavier, the darkness thicker. The floor beneath me seemed to warp, to melt. And that's when I realized the truth. The thing was never after just Finn. It was after both of us. This place, Black Pines Trailer Park, wasn't just built on land. It was built on something. Something ancient, something dark. A curse. The whispers I had heard as a kid. Those had been the warning signs, the signs that I'd ignored. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. The voice was hollow, like a corpse dragged over gravel. "You're mine now." I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. I felt my body go cold, and for a split second I thought I was going to die right there in that bed. The words echoed in my head, each syllable hanging in the air long after it was spoken. But then, just as quickly as it had come, it was gone. I bolted upright, gasping for air. I couldn't catch my breath. The room was empty, silent, except for one thing: Finn's bed was empty. I spun around, my heart thudding in my chest. Finn had been there when I fell asleep. He had to be. But now, his bed was bare. I rushed to the living room. my heart pounding harder with every step. That's when I found him. Finn was sitting in the dark, curled up on the couch, his back to me. "Finn," I whispered. He didn't answer. I stepped closer, reaching for him, when I saw it, the thing I would never forget. Finn's eyes, solid, black, no whites, no pupils, just empty voids of shadow, and he was smiling. My stomach turned, nausea rising like bile in my throat. This wasn't my little brother anymore. The thing had him. The darkness in the trailer felt suffocating now. It wasn't just the empty spaces or the creaking of the walls as they settled under the weight of time. It was the air itself. Thick, drenched with something foul and heavy. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like the walls were closing in, on me. Like the shadows weren't just passive observers but were alive, crawling, watching. I stood there, frozen, staring at Finn, my little brother, sitting on the couch, his back to me. His shoulders were slumped, as if weighed down by something far heavier than his small frame. His breathing was shallow, almost too shallow. It was the kind of breath you'd hear from someone trying to stifle a sob. But there was nothing else. No sounds of distress, no crying, nothing, and those eyes black, solid, hollow. It was like staring into a void, a deep, endless well. And there was something else there too, something wrong with his smile. It was stretched too wide, unnaturally so, and it didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they know something you don't, when they hold a terrible secret that they're savoring, letting it burn in their chest as they watch you suffer. I took a step forward, hesitant. I wasn't sure what to say or what to do. The thing in my brother's body was still wearing him like a costume, a skinwalker, or worse. I didn't know how to stop it, didn't know if there was even a way to fix it, but I had to try. "Finn?" My voice cracked as I called his name, again. My heart was pounding, echoing in my ears. He didn't respond, but his head tilted just slightly like he could hear me now. The smile on his face only grew wider, stretching unnaturally. I took another step forward, the air growing colder, the hairs on my neck standing on end. That's when I felt it, the weight. It wasn't just the presence of the thing wearing my brother's body. It was something else. A pressure, pushing, against me, closing in from all sides. It was like the whole trailer was squeezing me, pushing me into the walls. Then, suddenly, I heard it, the whispers. At first I thought it was the wind or the hum of the trailer settling, but no. The whispers were inside me now, slithering in my head, words I couldn't make out, murmurs like a crowd of voices just beyond my hearing. And then, one voice rose above the rest. "You can't save him." I froze. It was the same voice, the voice I'd heard in the darkness, in my dreams, in the thing's breath. It was the thing itself speaking from somewhere deep inside my brother. I reached out for Finn, my hand shaking. I had to try. I had to do something. He was my brother. I touched his shoulder. The second my skin made contact, the smile vanished. It was replaced with something far worse, a wide, gaping hole of darkness that seemed to stretch into infinity. I recoiled, stumbling back. Finn's head jerked to the side, his neck snapping unnaturally, a sickening crack that made me gag. "You're mine now," the voice whispered again. But it wasn't Finn's voice, it wasn't even the thing's voice anymore. It was my voice, a distorted version of me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. It was like the trailer had become a trap, a cage I couldn't escape from. The walls seemed to close in tighter, the air heavier, the darkness thicker. The floor beneath me seemed to warp, to melt. And that's when I realized the truth. The thing was never after just Finn. It was after both of us. This place, Black Pines Trailer Park, wasn't just built on land. It was built on something. Something ancient, something dark. A curse. The whispers I had heard as a kid. Those had been the warning signs, the signs that I'd ignored. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. The cult. The one my mom had warned me about. They had come here in the 70s. They had done something terrible here, something that had opened a door, and now that door had been left ajar for all these years. The thing that had been summoned wasn't going to stop until it had taken us all. I took another step back, my heart racing. "Finn," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Finn, please snap out of it. You have to fight it." The thing didn't move, but Finn's head tilted again, as if it was considering me, and then the smile, that smile, returned, the smile that wasn't his. The trailer groaned. The light bulb overhead flickered and buzzed, and in the dim light I saw it. Beneath Finn's skin, beneath the blackness of his eyes, there was a faint shape. Something slithering, like dark ink moving beneath flesh. It was inside him. It was in all of us now. Suddenly Finn stood up. Too fast, too rigid. He didn't move like a child anymore. He moved like something else, something other. My head was spinning. My body shook. I tried to breathe but couldn't. I was frozen in place. As Finn, no, the thing, took one slow step toward me, the whispers grew louder, merging together until they became a single overpowering chant. "It's too late." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. And as the thing reached out for me, I realized the truth I had been trying to deny. The trailer was never ours to escape from. Black Pines, this cursed land, had already claimed us. It had taken my brother. It was going to take me too. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. The last thing I remember before everything went black was Finn's voice. "You're mine now." And then, nothing. I woke up in darkness. The air was thick, cloying, pressing against my chest. I could barely breathe. The trailer felt like a tomb, suffocating and still. My limbs were heavy, and my head ached like I had been struck over and over, but there was no pain, no clarity, just a fog. A ringing silence filled the space, broken only by the sound of my labored breath. I forced my eyes open, but it didn't help. There was nothing, no light, no warmth, only the oppressive weight of the dark. I tried to move, to sit up, but I couldn't. My arms felt like they were made of concrete, and I couldn't get a grip on reality. My body refused to obey. Then, slowly, like a slow rise from beneath the surface of water, a shape began to form. The room was darker now, deeper than before, and the shapes around me twisted in ways they shouldn't. The walls warped, the shadows, no, the thing. They crawled across the ceiling like liquid darkness. A sickly, unnatural hum vibrated through, the trailer making my teeth ache, and then I heard it. That sound. The one I'd been dreading, the one I'd tried to ignore. The low whispering threading its way into my skull, curling around my thoughts, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. The voices, slithering, talking over each other, so distorted I couldn't make sense of them. But there was one voice that cut through them all. "You're too late." The voice was low, cold, and familiar. A voice that tasted like metal, like the air right before a storm. It was Finn's voice, but it wasn't Finn. Not anymore. I shot up, or at least tried to, but my limbs wouldn't cooperate. My vision swam in and out of focus, and then I saw him. Finn, or what used to be Finn. He was standing by the door, motionless, his black eyes reflecting nothing but emptiness. His skin was paler than it had been before, a ghostly shade of gray, and the smile, the same sick, stretched smile, was there again. But his mouth didn't move when he spoke. "I've been waiting for you," Finn's voice said, but it was like an echo, distant and cold. I could barely move. The weight of the darkness around me felt like it was crushing me, like the walls themselves were closing in. It wasn't just the space, though. It was him, the thing in Finn, the thing that had taken him. It was real now, more real than I was, more real than anything. I blinked and the room shifted. The trailer was gone, the walls were gone, the floor was gone. I was floating, suspended in nothing. And then, In the distance, I saw a faint shape, moving toward me, growing closer with every blink. The thing. It didn't look like Finn anymore. It had taken him. It had taken everything. "You can't run," it whispered. The voice echoed like wind through a cavern, like the howl of something long dead. "You can't hide. Not from me." I felt the tears on my cheeks before I even realized I was crying. It wasn't from fear. It was from the crushing loss of it all. The loss of everything I'd known. The loss of Finn, of my home, of myself. There was nothing left for me here. I had known that for a while, but it became clear then. Black Pines, this cursed, forgotten patch of land. It had always been a prison. There had never been a way out. I reached out, desperate to hold on to something, anything, but my hand just passed through the air. I reached again, and again. But there was nothing. Nothing except the thing in the dark. It reached for me. It was so close now, close enough that I could feel the chill of it, the breath that didn't come from lungs but from some unfathomable place deep inside it. A hollow place. "You're mine now," it said, and the words broke me. The thing took my hand, cold and slick like ice, and with it I felt everything fade. Every moment, every second, every memory slipped through my fingers like sand. I was falling, or maybe I was just being pulled. But in that moment, as the thing pulled me into the void, I realized something else. I wasn't alone in the dark. Not anymore. Finn was with me now. Even if it wasn't really him, even if he was gone, I could feel him in the whispers, in the cold, in the emptiness, and in that final moment, as the darkness closed in around me, I understood. Black Pines had always been waiting. It had always been hungry, and now it had me too. I don't know how long I sat there in the emergency vet's office, the sterile scent of antiseptic mixing with the cold, metallic taste of fear in the back of my throat. The snow outside fell heavily, like it had been doing for days, coating the world in a layer of silence. Inside, it was too quiet, too still, for a place that was supposed to be filled with life. The only sound was the soft hiss of the oxygen tank and the quiet murmur of the vet's instructions, her hands gentle but firm. "Elliot, you need to say goodbye," Dr. Monroe said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my heart already shattered. Shadow, my husky, the dog I'd raised from a pup, was slowly slipping away. His ice blue eyes, so sharp and intelligent, were already clouding over, losing their familiar gleam. They locked onto mine one last time, like he was trying to memorize, my face trying to say something that neither of us could quite understand. I cradled him close, pressing my forehead against his. The vet administered the injection, and Shadow's body stiffened for a moment. His eyes went dim, and he slumped in my arms. No longer the vibrant dog I'd spent countless hours with, wandering the woods or trekking through the snow. "Wait for me on the other side, boy," I whispered through my tears, my voice trembling. Buried him the next morning. The ground too frozen to dig deep. I made do with a small hole, just enough to lay him to rest under the old oak tree behind my cabin. The snow had covered the yard, the frost coating everything in a heavy, ghostly sheen. As I shoveled the earth over him, I felt a strange weight pressing on my chest, a heaviness that had nothing to do with the weight of the shovel in my hands. When the last of the dirt was in place, I stood there, feeling the cold wind bite at my skin. There was nothing left but the bare tree above me, its branches bare and twisted against the dark sky. For the first time, I felt the true sting of loss. I trudged back to the house, the silence deafening in its emptiness. The house was too quiet, without Shadow's playful bark, without the sound of his claws clicking across the hardwood floor. I climbed into bed, my body aching with the weight of grief. It wasn't until that night that I heard it. The first sound, The sound I'd come to dread in the days and weeks that followed was soft, almost imperceptible at first. Clawing. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I lay still, listening. It was faint but distinct, claws scratching against the hardwood floor, echoing through the dark house. I knew it wasn't possible. Shadow was gone. His body was buried beneath the oak tree outside, cold and still. And yet, I could hear it, the unmistakable sound of his paws. I gripped the blankets tightly, willing myself to stay calm, telling myself it was grief, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But the sound grew louder, sharper. Then I heard something else, a low, wet growl. It wasn't like anything Shadow ever made. It was deep and guttural, vibrating through the floorboards. I got out of bed, heart hammering in my chest, and flicked on the light, half expecting to see Shadow standing there. But the hallway was empty. I checked every room, every corner, but there was no sign of him, just the eerie silence settling back into place like nothing had ever happened. The next morning, I found the first of the paw prints, small muddy tracks leading from the back door all the way to my bed. There was no way Shadow could have gotten inside. His body was cold in the ground. Still, the prints were there, fresh, like he'd walked in from the snow-covered yard. I didn't know what to make of it. Was it my mind playing tricks on me? Or had something else found its way into my house? The tracks led to my bed, then faded away as though they had never existed. That was the moment I realized something was wrong. But I didn't want to believe, not yet. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, trying to convince myself that it was just grief, that I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. Something had come back, something that wasn't Shadow, and it was just getting started. It was 3 days after I buried Shadow. 3 long days of wrestling with the feeling that I wasn't alone in my own home. It had been years since I'd been this unsettled. The cabin was supposed to be my refuge, my sanctuary from the world, a place I'd worked hard to create for myself. But now it felt more like a prison, suffocating me with its silence. The first night had been the worst. The clawing noises, the growl in the hallway. It had all felt like a twisted version of my grief, manifesting into something tangible, something I couldn't ignore. But when I woke up the next morning and found the muddy paw prints, the logical part of me tried to dismiss it as some strange trick of the mind. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it was some wild animal that had wandered into the yard and tracked mud inside. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. That evening, I decided to take a walk. I needed air. The cold outside felt like a slap in the face, a reminder that the world kept moving even when everything inside me had come to a halt. I walked for a while, down the snow-covered path that led into the woods behind my cabin. My boots crunched over the frost and the snowflakes seemed to fall in slow motion, their delicate forms glowing in the dim twilight. But no matter how far I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't the usual discomfort I felt when I was alone in the wilderness. This was different. It was as if something, or someone, was lurking just beyond the tree line, waiting, listening. I pushed the thought away and focused on the crisp air, the scent of pine and earth. But as I neared the old oak tree where I'd buried Shadow, something stopped me dead in my tracks. A sound. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me again. But this was different. It wasn't the usual forest noises. This was unmistakable. A whine. Soft, almost like a whimper, but with a familiarity that made my stomach drop. It sounded like Shadow. I turned, instinctively searching for the source of the sound. But there was nothing. Just the dark expanse of trees, the faint moonlight barely, breaking through the branches. "Shadow?" I called out, my voice hoarse. Nothing. The snow around me was undisturbed, still thick, no tracks leading in or out. Yet the sound lingered, hanging in the air like a whisper I couldn't quite reach. Stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting. But the longer I stood in the cold, the more I realized something. This wasn't normal. This wasn't Shadow's whine. It couldn't be. Not anymore. My breath came in short bursts as I turned back toward the cabin, my legs moving faster than I realized. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing in, the air thicker than before. But as I stepped closer to the cabin, the feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever. I glanced over my shoulder once more, half expecting to see Shadow's familiar figure standing in the distance. But there was nothing. When I returned inside, I locked the door behind me, the familiar click of the deadbolt grounding me, but it didn't help. The house was still too quiet, too empty. My chest tightened as I moved into the kitchen, staring at Shadow's water bowl that still sat by the door, empty, unused. I thought about filling it, then stopped myself. There was no need. The house felt colder than usual. It wasn't the draft from the windows or the bitter chill that seemed to seep into the bones of everything made of wood. No, this was something different, something unnatural. I tried to convince myself that it was just grief, that I was still adjusting to the loss. But deep down, I couldn't ignore what was happening. I climbed into bed that night, pulling the covers over my head, trying to bury the anxiety that clawed at my mind. But sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts were scattered, my body tense. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. At 3:02 a.m., I heard it again. The faint click of claws on hardwood. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. I lay still, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the bed creaking beneath me as I shifted, trying to listen more carefully. The sound was coming from the kitchen. Soft, rhythmic. Shadow's paw pads clicking against the floor. But when I turned on the light and rushed to the kitchen, there was nothing there. I checked every room again, every corner of the house. But everything was as it should be. Empty. Quiet. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My body felt tense, like I was on high alert, waiting for something that I couldn't quite explain. I went back to bed, trying to calm myself. I even tried to rationalize it. Grief. I muttered under my breath, trying to convince myself. It's just grief. But then, I felt it. A faint pressure on the mattress, just beside me. It wasn't much, but it was enough. A small weight, as if something had just jumped onto the bed, right where Shadow used to curl up beside me. I reached out, my fingers brushing the blankets, but there was nothing there. No warm body, no comforting presence. Only a chill that made my skin crawl. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Instead, I lay wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had become of my beloved dog. What was it that was still in my house, and why couldn't I make it go away? The next morning, I found another set of muddy paw prints on the kitchen floor. This time, they led in a circle, stopping at the back door before vanishing completely. And that was when I realized Shadow wasn't coming back, not in any way I understood. Something else was here, and it was wearing his skin. The snow had been falling in steady flakes for 2 days, covering everything in a soft white blanket that only seemed to emphasize the silence around me. I had gotten used to the quiet of Blackwater, but this was suffocating. The kind of quiet that wrapped itself around your thoughts, pulled them apart, and left you wondering if you were losing your grip on reality. I thought I was ready to move past the loss of Shadow. I had to be. I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not out here, not in the middle of nowhere. There was work to do, photography to capture, life to continue living. But it had been harder than I expected, especially with the way things had been in the house since the night Shadow died. It was like I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still here, his presence lingering in the corners, in the creaks of the floorboards, in the sounds of claws clicking across the hardwood. At first I told myself it was nothing. The sounds, the faint growls, the whispers in the dark, they were all just the side effects of grief, of losing a pet you loved like family. But the longer I lived with the strange occurrences, the harder it became to believe that. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. I should have been out there photographing the wildlife, the bears, the wolves, the majestic eagles that circled the frozen skies. But every time I picked up my camera, the air felt thick, oppressive, like I wasn't supposed to be out there, like the land was watching me. My mind wandered too much, and I found myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting Shadow to trot into view, wagging his tail, eyes bright with excitement. That's when the signs started showing up. The first one was simple enough, something I could dismiss as a trick of my mind. The squeak of the door, the quiet scrape of nails on wood. I had heard it before, but then I saw it, a flash of movement in the corner of my eye. Shadow's chew, toy, the one he used to gnaw on whenever he wanted to annoy me, had appeared on the rug in the living room. It was wet, slick with saliva, just like it had been the night before his death. I stared at it for a long time. The rational part of me told me to ignore it, that I had left it out, maybe in the kitchen, and it had just somehow found its way back. But that didn't feel right. I had thrown that toy out after Shadow died, after the vet said the words I hadn't wanted to hear. He's gone. I went to the kitchen to check, hoping it wasn't what I thought it was. But the cupboard where I'd put the toy was empty. My mind raced. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe I had forgotten it was still in the house. Maybe I hadn't. Tossed it out after all. Maybe I was just imagining things. But my gut told me otherwise. That night, the whines returned. I tried to ignore them, pulling the blankets over my head as if they would shield me from the reality of the situation. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't drown out the sound. The soft whimpering, the low growl that vibrated through the floor, deep and wet, like it was coming from a throat that didn't belong to a dog. I got up, heart pounding. But when I turned on the light and looked around, there was nothing. The room was empty. The air was thick and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, but there was no sign of Shadow, or whatever was using his voice. Still, I pushed it out of my mind. I told myself it was just the stress, the grief, the isolation. But the next morning I found the paw prints. Not just the muddy ones that had appeared before, but fresh, clear paw prints in the snow. They led from the back door to my bed, and then, inexplicably, they turned around and headed straight back out. I could have sworn I'd locked the door the night before, but the latch was undone, slightly ajar. That day, I called the vet. Dr. Allen was one of the few people I still trusted in Blackwater, even if the small-town rumors about strange happenings and lost pets had started to creep into my thoughts. "I'm just calling to check in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is there any chance something could have been missed? Could there have been something in Shadow that might have, I don't know, caused these odd things to happen?" I heard Dr. Allen's voice crack over the line. "Elliot, I can't explain it. When we did the euthanasia, he was gone. I checked everything. He was gone, but..." "But?" I asked, holding my breath. "But if you're hearing things or seeing things, it could be, well, it could be grief. There's a lot of trauma tied to a pet's passing. Sometimes it's hard for the mind to accept that they're really gone. You understand?" I swallowed hard. "I understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But even as the words left my mouth, I didn't believe them. I stayed off the phone for the rest of the day, not wanting to hear another well-meaning but unhelpful explanation. My mind raced, but the feeling of being watched, of being followed, was getting stronger with every passing minute. I tried to focus on other things, on the photos I had to edit, on the calls I needed to make for upcoming jobs, but the gnawing feeling didn't go away. And then it happened again. That night, as I tried to drift off to sleep, I felt it. The weight. A familiar pressure on the bed, a soft shift of the blankets. It was like Shadow had jumped up beside me, just like he used to, curling up at my feet. But when I reached down to pet him, there was nothing. The warmth I had always felt from him wasn't there. Instead, my fingers brushed against something cold, something wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I pulled my hand back, my chest tight with panic. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I didn't move. I couldn't. The last thing I heard before I finally passed out from sheer exhaustion was a low growl, deep and guttural, vibrating through the mattress. It was the kind of growl you hear from a creature that has no business being in your world. A sound that didn't belong in Blackwater. A sound that didn't belong in my home. It was a sound that belonged to something that was wearing Shadow's body. It's hard to describe the moment when the veil of reality begins to crack. You think you've seen the world for what it is, but then something so subtle at first slips through that crack and everything changes. You start to question what's real, what's not, what's in your head, and what's something far darker, far more primal, lurking just beyond your grasp. That night I woke to the unmistakable feeling of weight pressing down on the bed. Not the sort of weight that's natural for a dog to leave, but something heavier, something that made the mattress groan under the pressure. I knew instantly. I had to. It was the same sensation I'd experienced 1,000 times before. Shadow, jumping onto the bed after a long day, curling up, at my feet or lying against my legs, his thick fur warm and familiar. But this time something felt wrong. This wasn't Shadow. I didn't know it, not consciously, but my body knew. I could feel the difference in the coldness of the air, in the way the weight settled in the wrong place. It wasn't Shadow's fur against my skin. It wasn't the familiar, comforting rhythm of his breathing, his paws twitching in sleep. I lay still, holding my breath, waiting for the sound of Shadow's soft snore. I had to hold on to that, the memory of it, the memory of him. But instead there was only silence. No snoring, no soft, steady rhythm of sleep. Just a pressure, a cold, oppressive pressure, like the dead weight of a body that should not be there. It took all my willpower not to move. I couldn't bring myself to turn and face whatever it was, the thing that had taken Shadow's place. That wasn't my dog. It wasn't him. I told myself to breathe. Just breathe. But even my breath felt wrong. Shallow, like I wasn't truly in control. There was something out of place in the air, in the house, a presence so thick that it pressed against me from all sides, making it impossible to ignore. My hand finally moved, trembling with fear, to where I knew Shadow's body would have been, where I had once felt his warmth and his soft fur. Instead, my fingers met something cold, rigid, like rotting flesh. My stomach lurched, and I snatched my hand away as if burned. My pulse thundered in my ears. I wanted to scream, but my throat was too tight. Then, the low growl started. It wasn't a familiar sound, not the playful growl of a dog in the yard or the grumble of a dog defending its territory. No, this was different. It was guttural, deep, vibrating with a wrongness that scraped against the bones in my chest. It rumbled low and ferocious, like the sound of something too big for this world, something that had no place here, something that had no right to be in my bed. And then it spoke. The words came slow, almost like they were stitched together from fragments of sound, like it was trying to force the shape of something human into its voice. But it wasn't right. It couldn't be right. You said to wait, it rasped, the voice thick with something decayed, like the words had been dredged from the bottom of a grave. My heart stopped in my chest, and I came back. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. All I could do was lie there, frozen, as the weight on the bed shifted, as the thing that wore my dog's body spoke again, its voice scraping against my thoughts. You wanted me to wait, didn't you? The air felt thick now, choking, like I was suffocating under a blanket of frost. It wasn't just the physical weight of it. It was the feeling that something had invaded my mind, taken up residence in my soul, and twisted everything I once knew about reality. That thing was not Shadow. Shadow wouldn't have spoken like that. He wouldn't have growled like that. You said to wait, it repeated, a harsh whisper now, as if it were somehow testing me, pressing its dead lips closer to my skin. That was the breaking point. I couldn't stay still anymore. My body snapped into motion before my mind could fully comprehend what was happening. I scrambled out of bed, not caring that my feet were bare and the floor was cold beneath them. I shoved myself backward, away from the thing, my back pressing against the wall as if it could somehow shield me from the horror that had taken shape on the bed. The thing stirred, a groan of flesh dragging against fabric, of something too large moving too fast for me to process. The growl rose in volume, rising from the depths of a thing far too unnatural to be allowed in the world I knew. My breath came in ragged gasps, the room spinning with a sickening, dizzying whirl of fear. I reached for the phone beside the bed, hands shaking so violently that I could barely keep my fingers on the screen. I dialed 911, hoping to hear the reassuring voice of a dispatcher. But when the call connected, all I could hear was silence, until a faint, wet sound started in the background. The growl. It was coming from the phone, from everywhere. And just before the call cut out, I heard it. "Wait for me, Elliot." The words hung in the air long after the line went dead. They echoed in my skull, repeating like a prayer I couldn't escape, a chant I couldn't unlearn. I had told it to wait. I had asked it to wait. And it had come back. I don't remember much after that. I remember running, out into the snow, into the cold night, and then nothing. I think I lost consciousness, I'm not sure. But when I woke up the next morning, the house was empty, quiet. The air had returned to its normal frozen stillness. Except for the paw prints. They were everywhere. In the snow, leading up to the door, then scattered across the floor of my living room, as though they had walked through the entire house while I slept. The tracks were fresh, but there was no dog, no shadow. Just the remnants of something that had returned from the grave to haunt me. I couldn't stay here anymore. I couldn't look at those paw prints anymore. I needed to get out of Blackwater, away from whatever nightmare I had unleashed, but I knew that it wasn't over. It couldn't be. The ground beneath Blackwater was thin, and sometimes when you bury something you love, something else digs it up first. I couldn't escape the feeling that Blackwater had always been waiting for me, waiting for me to understand something I couldn't comprehend, something far older than the snow and trees that surrounded my cabin. The town itself felt alive in a way that I couldn't explain, like it had its own pulse, its own rhythm, beneath the crust of civilization. There was something wrong in Blackwater, and it had always been there, silent, but patient. The night after I woke up to those paw prints, I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't even look at my cabin anymore. Couldn't stand the thought of stepping foot in the house where the thing that wore Shadow's skin had walked, had spoke. The things that had come to life in my memories weren't just figments of grief. They were real, far too real. I packed a bag, grabbed whatever I could from the cabin, a few clothes, a flashlight, my camera, but it felt futile. It felt like running from something that was already in my blood. There was no point in running, no point in escaping the thing I had conjured by simply existing in this place. It knew me. It knew my pain. It knew my longing for my lost dog. And most of all, it knew what I had said. "You said to wait." The words kept repeating in my head. That's when it hit me. A sickening realization, the kind that makes your stomach lurch and your mind want to shut down. I hadn't just buried Shadow. No. I had buried something else. Something that had been waiting in the frozen earth all along. Something that fed on grief, on loss, on the raw, vulnerable moments that slip through your fingers like sand. I had buried something ancient. I drove, or tried to drive, out of Blackwater. But the road, that familiar stretch of snow-packed highway that should have led me to safety, seemed different. The lights of my truck cut through the falling snow, but the road ahead twisted and bent in ways it shouldn't have. It felt as though the snow was falling faster, heavier, piling up in drifts that blocked the road, pushing me deeper into the woods. I had nowhere to go. The thought hit me like a slap. I wasn't going anywhere. The road was just a false sense of movement, of progress, when in reality I was going in circles. I had already been consumed, and no matter where I went, I would never escape. I had become part of this place. I had become part of it. The truck sputtered, the engine cutting out as the snow piled higher and higher. I cursed under my breath and tried to restart the engine, but the silence outside was unnerving, like the world was holding its breath, waiting. It was then that I heard it, the click-clack of claws on frozen pavement. My heart skipped a beat. I froze. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to acknowledge what was standing outside the truck. But I did. The sight that greeted me wasn't the husky I had known. It wasn't the loyal dog who had run with me through the wilds of Alaska, his fur a bright splash of white against the snow. No. What stood outside the truck was something far more twisted. Shadow's body, or what had once been Shadow, stood just beyond the headlights, but now his once beautiful coat was matted, stained with dark, viscous fluid. His fur was patchy, clumped together in sickening tangles, as though something had been gnawing at it. The paws, oh God, the paws were oversized, grotesque, with elongated claws that scraped against the ground. But worst of all was the face. It was wrong. The eyes were empty, a hollow shade of blue, no longer filled with warmth or intelligence. The skin around its muzzle sagged, the flesh stretched tight like it was too big for the bones beneath it. And from its mouth, its rotting mouth, came a whisper. "You didn't really think you could leave, did you, Elliot?" I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only stare as it took a slow step forward, its paws dragging across the snow, leaving deep impressions in the ice. And then, it smiled. It wasn't Shadow. Not anymore. It was something worse, something that had slipped inside of him, wearing his body like a costume, like a puppet on a string. "You said to wait," it repeated, the words like a mantra, a curse. I waited, and now, you'll join me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My vision blurred. My hands trembled, gripping the steering wheel as I willed the truck to start, but there was nothing. Nothing I could do. The engine sputtered once, then gave out completely. It was over. The thing outside, Shadow's corpse, leaned in close to the window, its breath fogging the glass. And I heard that voice again, a whisper too close, too intimate. "You called me back." It wasn't just the loss of my dog that had brought this about. It was the unspoken promise, the lingering thread of grief that had torn open something ancient beneath the soil. Blackwater's ground had always been thin. It had always been waiting. I had thought Shadow's death was the end, but it had only been the beginning. I didn't even fight when the thing outside, the thing that wore my dog's body, slipped into the truck. It wrapped its cold, decaying limbs around me as if it had always belonged there. The stench of grave soil filled my nose. Its teeth scraped my skin, and it whispered the last words I would ever hear. "You should have never asked me to wait." Then, everything went black. The snow in Blackwater never really stops. It keeps falling gently but endlessly, as if it's covering up the things that shouldn't be seen. The paw prints from the creature that wore Shadow's skin faded over time, as they always do, but the town whispers. They know. They feel the weight of what's buried beneath them. Sometimes in the quiet hours of the night, they say you can still hear the clicking of claws against the hardwood floors, the sound of something waiting just beyond the door, and if you listen closely enough, you might hear the faintest whisper, a voice too familiar, too intimate. "You said to wait, but there's no one left to answer."